Amelia walked down the cemetery avenue and kept stopping to avoid another puddle. "Well, the water has made a mess here too," she said sadly. The woman was holding a modest bunch of carnations, the only flowers she had bought at the pavilion before she got on the bus. The rain that had been falling non-stop for days had turned the gravel on the paths into a swamp. But Amelia paid no attention to it. At the entrance to the cemetery, there was a huge willow tree whose branches stretched up to the sky as if trying to cover it. It stood like a giant guarding this sad corner of grief. Amelia quickened her step as she passed the old woman. She waved to the elderly caretaker and, without waiting for a response, walked on. Today she had a special mission, one that kept her on her toes. For about a week now, in the pocket of her purse, Amelia had been carrying a hidden camera that she was going to install on her husband Benjamin's grave. Naturally, it was a forced measure, because for the third time in a row she had seen footprints near the grave, small footprints, clearly female. "That's how you get those footprints." "It doesn't look like a big deal to me," Vivian said to her work colleague. But Amelia just shook her head. Perhaps if it hadn't been for that flood, when the river had overflowed its banks after a heavy downpour, she wouldn't have noticed anything. Fortunately, the river hadn't reached the cemetery, but the increased rainfall from the week had done its job anyway. So Amelia was very interested. And someone comes to her husband's grave, and with such enviable regularity. Who is this stranger who shows such touching devotion? The answer to this question Amelia did not yet know. The cemetery keeper, Andrew, was also unable to shed any light on the situation, as he had not seen who was visiting Benjamin's grave. It is understandable, an elderly man, and the cemetery is a busy place. As she approached the mound, Amelia placed a bouquet of carnations in the vase and gently stroked the cross with her hand. Then Amelia looked around and began setting up the camera. As she did so, she couldn't help but notice a small chain of footprints in the area of the bed. Those very footprints again. But who comes here? Benjamin had always been reserved and reserved and reserved. And here he suddenly has a secret admirer. To tell the truth, Amelia didn't know why she was doing this. For a moment she had wanted to watch over her husband's grave, as if that way she could be close to him at all times. Deftly placing the camera in a hidden niche in the bed area, Amelia said goodbye to her husband and walked back. She'd only been released from the ward for half an hour as it was, and she had long since used that time throughout the workday. All Amelia could think about was the hidden camera footage. According to the salesman, the video was stored on a remote server or in the cloud, which in turn was very convenient. She purposely didn't watch the footage until the evening. It wasn't until bedtime that she finally dared to examine the day's archive. Amelia lay in bed and took the smartphone in her hands, which were trembling slightly. At first there was nothing interesting there, the usual cemetery landscapes, a realm of grief and sorrow topped with crosses of tombstones and fences. But as the timing neared evening, Amelia suddenly saw the silhouette of the man who had come to see her husband. And that's when it all became clear. In astonishment, she nearly dropped the phone from her hands. The mysterious guest who came to her husband's grave was a child. He looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. But what is he doing in a cemetery, and even on her husband's grave? Meanwhile, the boy just stood looking at the mound, as if hoping to see something special there. Then he touched the cross with his hand and walked away. Amelia's heart hammered harder. Who was the boy, and why was he coming to Benjamin? She's good too. She thought by the look of the footprints a woman was coming there, and the mysterious visitor turned out to be a lad. So much for the mystery, Benjamin, Amelia whispered. Her husband's life had been taken by an accident on the lake where he was fishing with his business associate Andrew. Both aspiring businessmen were wearing life jackets when the boat capsized. Only Benjamin's equipment turned out to be defective and did not hold air properly. The body of the entrepreneur was found only on the 3rd day, when there was no hope for anything. Grief-stricken Amelia was literally at a loss for words. What should she do now? How to live without a loved one? With these thoughts, as if with the worst enemies, she fought day after day. But life gave her no choice. Amelia's heart clenched with a rush of pain and longing. Thoughts of Benjamin, his sweet smile, his gentle gaze tormented her soul. They had been inseparable, and their love had seemed unshakable. But now she wondered, were her feelings mutual? Before, Amelia had thought she knew her husband like the back of her hand, for he had always been a gentleman, never gave her any reason to worry about him. Amelia trusted him as herself, and even on that fateful day when her husband went fishing, she was sure that he would return. How could he not? He always did, and nothing. Fishing was his passion. I wish Benjamin were here now, Amelia thought. I wish Benjamin were here to comfort me and tell me everything would be all right. At that moment, Amelia did feel a little better. She promised herself to find this boy, no matter what it cost her. There was a reason he came with such enviable regularity. There was probably some kind of mystery behind it. What it was, Amelia couldn't figure out. But now she had proof that the footsteps at the grave were not just a dream. Amelia realized how wrong she'd been, imagining a woman with tiny feet. It was actually much simpler than that. At night, Amelia didn't sleep well. She dreamed of a hidden camera lens that for some reason was pointed at her. Waking up in a cold sweat, she got up and turned on the light. Of course, there was no camera, but her heart was pounding like crazy, trying to jump out of her chest. Meanwhile, dawn was slowly breaking on the horizon. Despite the fact that Benjamin was a businessman, there was never much money in the family. That's why Amelia didn't think it was shameful to work as a nurse in the ward for the seriously ill. It wasn't an easy job, but she didn't complain it was a contribution to the family budget, and even more so after Benjamin's death. Amelia made a quick breakfast. She sat at the kitchen table for a while and began to get ready for work. As she did so, she kept thinking of the boy who had come to the cemetery. But what could that little boy and her husband have in common? However, there was no time to think about it, since recently in the department has changed the head, who decided to roll mountains in his position. He's an inveterate careerist. He's had his share of grief, and he'll make you sweat, said her friend Vivian. But Amelia didn't pay much attention to that. Come on, it'll all work out, she thought, being an optimist by nature. That morning, however, things took a different turn. Amelia had long since become accustomed to the fact that the air in the critically ill ward was saturated with a mixture of drugs and disinfection. She walked briskly down the cool corridor, hurrying to get to the nurse's room as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Carl, the head of the ward, blocked the way. His icy, commanding gaze froze her in place. "Amelia, come here," he said in his harsh voice. "I have a report on my desk about your dereliction of duty." She flinched and her eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean, what?" Amelia asked, barely containing the tremor in her voice. "I always do my job faithfully," Amelia said. "However, I have evidence in my possession that this is not the case." Carl replied coldly. "Complaints come from both patients and staff." Amelia felt the longing and helplessness building up inside at a tremendous rate. Yes, she had given her best in nursing, and the accusations of incompetence were like a punch in the gut. How could it be? She began. But Carl didn't let her finish. "That's enough," he interrupted her in a harsh tone. "From this day on, the department is introducing a system of rewards and punishments. Employees will have the opportunity to earn points for good work and be financially rewarded for it." "But is it only about money?" Amelia argued vehemently. "We save people. We care for them. Our job is to alleviate their suffering, not to accumulate points." Well, a hospital is also a business. And the laws of the market should apply here, replied the head of the department nonchalantly. Besides, starting from tomorrow, the nursing staff must wear special uniforms. This is necessary to maintain discipline and order. Amelia was stunned. The system of rewards and punishments, the uniforms. Was this what she was aiming for as a nurse? She wanted to help people, not be commercialized. Strong emotions overwhelmed her, threatening to burst out. "Carl," she said in a firm voice, "I'm giving up this dodgy point scheme. I didn't come here to chase money. I came here to take care of patients." Carl's face contorted into a grimace. "You mean you're refusing?" he asked icily. "Did you know that under the terms of your employment contract you are obliged to follow the orders of the management?" Amelia sighed sadly. "Yes, I am aware of that," she replied calmly. "But I cannot go against my principles and will not participate in this humiliating scam." Carl stared at her in silence for a few seconds, his face impenetrable. Then he turned away and gave Amelia a scornful look. "Well, is that what you want?" he said. "But you'll regret it." The ward manager turned and walked away, leaving Amelia alone in the middle of the hospital corridor. Her heart was racing and her mind was spinning with thoughts. Deep down, she knew it was the right choice. She couldn't betray her patients and her ideals. But at the same time, she realized that such a choice could cost her dearly. It was said that at one time Carl had graduated from medical school with honors and was considered one of the best graduates in the history of the faculty. And it was also said that his father-in-law was the head doctor of the hospital Caleb, who had an extremely harsh temper and ruthlessly broke the careers of undesirable employees. Amelia was brought out of her sad thoughts by Vivian's voice. "Well, have you already received a beating from the bosses?" "Yes, I did," Amelia replied. "Where could I go without them? A new broom is a new broom." Vivian grinned. "It's Carl's doing his best for his father-in-law, I suppose. I'll bet he's soft and fluffy at home. He brings his wife slippers in the morning and catches every word she says. He's got a nice daughter, Barbara. But her stepmother doesn't like her." "Stepmother?" Amelia raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Is he married a second time?" Vivian wrinkled her nose. "Yes, Carl has a daughter from his first marriage. His wife Valerie was taken away by oncology. Then he was introduced to her by the head doctor, so to speak, to put his daughter in good hands. She doesn't need anything but restaurants and beauty salons." Amelia shook her head. Truth be told, she didn't like collecting gossip. So Amelia found it unnecessary to inquire about the details of the character of the boss's second wife. "Listen, Vivian, do you happen to know who complained about me? I think it was one of the patients, or maybe it was a colleague," she asked. Vivian's face showed genuine amazement. Vivian said goodbye and disappeared into one of the wards. Amelia nodded and decided to visit the janitor at once. After all, she had already received a reprimand from Carl, so now she could do her best to earn his trust by doing something. The hot summer sun was beating down mercilessly after the recent rains, casting a golden glow on the courtyard of the hospital complex. The flood damage had already been repaired, and life was slowly returning to normal. The smell of dampness mixed with the fragrance of flowers wafting from a nearby flower seemed unbearably soulful. Suddenly, a lone silhouette caught Amelia's eye. A man in dirty work clothes sat on a bench by an overturned bin. His head slumped as if he were carrying an unbearable weight on his shoulders. "David," Amelia exclaimed, recognizing the hospital janitor. He raised his head and his eyes filled with tears. "Hello, Amelia," he said hoarsely, rising from the bench. "How are you, my dear?" "I'm all right, I guess." "How are yours?" Amelia asked. "I'm not doing well." Amelia, the janitor, lowered his head and looked at something under the bench. I'm in trouble, help me." Amelia came closer, still not understanding what had upset the elderly janitor so much. A large dog, covered in mud, was sitting in a corner, moaning softly. The pet looked sadly at Amelia. "What's wrong, David?" she asked anxiously. He shook his head. "A patient died the other day. We worked in the same factory together for 20 years. He had a heart attack. Rex was with him. The poor guy was crying." Amelia felt a prick of pity. At that moment, she remembered that she had already seen this dog on a walk with his owner, a calm, friendly and smiling man. And now the pet was orphaned. "And what to do now?" she asked. "Who will take him?" David's eyes were filled with despair. "I don't know, Amelia. There's no one left." As soon as they put his master in the coffin, he began to whimper and scratch the coffin with his paw. His eyes are sad, he cries all the time. "I'd take him away, but where to? We are living in a one-room flat with my wife, and my grandson is visiting for the summer." Amelia looked at the dog with pity. The dog, sensing her gaze, stood up, pressed his ears to his head, and stretched out his muzzle to her. His eyes expressed pain, despair, and grief for his departed master. "David, shall I have him for myself?" Amelia exclaimed happily. "Amelia," exclaimed the janitor. "You're a real angel, thank you very much." Amelia stroked the dog's head and he whimpered as if thanking her. "I've never owned a dog before," Amelia said, embarrassed. "I don't even know what it's like." "Don't worry, Amelia. Rex is a quiet dog. He won't make any noise. And he likes to go for walks," said the janitor. "Well, you go on, sweetheart, or the boss will scold you. You'll come round after work, won't you?" "Sure, David. Just find him a leash." "Okay," said the janitor. "Okay, we'll do that." Amelia went to work. But in her mind was Rex. She imagined his pain, his loneliness, and the tender devotion with which the dog looked at his dead master. At the end of her shift, tired as usual after work, she eagerly went to see David. As it turned out, the dog had been eagerly awaiting her arrival. Amelia squatted down in front of the dog. Rex slowly raised his head and sighed heavily, as if he was intertwined with sadness and hoped that he would soon find his owner again, and then licked her hand, softly and gently. Amelia smiled. "Rex," she said softly, stroking his back. "You know, it's sad for you, but you're not alone. Now you're going to live with me." The janitor stood by and watched silently. His eyes were filled with gratitude for what Amelia had done. After saying goodbye to David, she took the leash in her hand and led her new friend towards the exit of the hospital yard. At that moment, her phone in her purse alerted her mistress to a notification. Amelia flinched, then realized with distinct clarity. Thus, the electronic assistant of covert surveillance was signaling to her that something interesting had come into the camera lens. Amelia opened the program and froze with amazement. The thing was that the same boy she had seen before was on the tape again. And the most interesting thing was that the recording was in real time. That is, he was still at Benjamin's grave. Amelia thought for a moment, then looked anxiously at the face of her wristwatch. What if we go to the cemetery right now, talk to the boy, and find out what's what? Especially since it's not far from here, she thought. "Yeah, let's go for a walk," Amelia whispered, taking Rex's leash. The evening sun was setting behind the horizon, coloring the sky with violet and scarlet tones. A cool breeze whispered that night was coming soon. Rex fidgeted, his ears perked up as if he sensed something wrong. They walked along the narrow path that led to the farthest corner of the cemetery, where Benjamin was buried. It had been a long time, more than 6 months, but Amelia still couldn't come to terms with her husband's passing. Every week she went to the grave to talk, to share her worries. It was as if Benjamin could hear her through the prism of time and the thickness of the mound. The cemetery was met with a cold silence, broken only by the faint rustling of tree branches, coupled with the sound of heels cutting through the heavy atmosphere of mournful oblivion. Amelia saw in the distance, some distance away, leaning on an old, time-damaged wooden bench, a small boy. He was dressed in dark, shabby clothes, too big for his skinny body. On his head was an old cap with patch marks, and his dark hair stuck out unruly in all directions. His brown eyes were bright and lively, like two sparks, looking at the bunch of wildflowers laid on the grave. When he felt someone's gaze on him, the boy raised his head. When he saw Amelia, he hesitated, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Who are you, little boy?" she asked cautiously, still not sure what was going on. "I'm James," he whispered, shaking with fear. "I've come to see Daddy, to see Daddy." James, Amelia repeated, as if in a dream, "To see who, Papa?" "Uncle Benjamin," said the boy, pointing to the oak cross. "That's my papa." At that moment, the world seemed to stop for Amelia. The wind stopped rustling the leaves and the birds were silent. It was as if someone had switched off the sound. "You're wrong," Amelia whispered, speechless for a moment. "It's my husband. He died 6 months ago." "I know," the boy lowered his eyes. "But that's my daddy." Rex whimpered softly, as if sensing the change that was coming, and huddled against Amelia's legs. Truth be told, she really didn't know what to do next. But what else could she say? How could she explain to this kid that Benjamin was gone forever, and life had split in two? "How do you know Benjamin?" Amelia asked in a shaky voice, and took a step towards the boy. "He used to work in the office," James said, looking at the ground. "I used to come to see him. We used to play checkers with Uncle Benjamin. He used to give me candy. He also promised to buy me a new robot. We even wanted to go to the zoo." "And your mum?" Amelia whispered, unable to hold back her tears. The boy sighed sadly. "Mum died a long time ago." He paused and lowered his head even lower, as if from the weight of forgotten words. "Uncle Benjamin said he would be my daddy now." At that moment, Amelia felt extremely dizzy and almost lost her senses. To tell the truth, she didn't understand how this was possible. How could she have lived with this mystery all these years without realizing the existence of this boy who had become a rival in love to Benjamin? "How did you know he was dead?" Amelia asked, struggling to keep the confusing thoughts in her head. "They told me when I came to the office," the boy replied. He looked at Amelia through his tears. The little boy's eyes seemed wan and empty, as if they still reflected all those unspoken words of love and sorrow from life that remained in his soul. Amelia stood there, not knowing what to do. It seemed that the boy was a street child and lived wherever he could, and in her soul there was a storm of incomprehensible feelings, where compassion for this lonely boy and anger at her husband for hiding the child's existence from her were mixed. Added to all this was a heavy sense of irrevocable loss, she said. Quietly, she brought her hand to her face to wipe away the tears she could no longer hold back. "I will take you to my house. You can call me Aunt Amelia." She gently stroked James's head, feeling the simple gesture make him feel a little better. In that moment, she knew that the boy was innocent and had nothing to do with the heartbreaking secret between her and Benjamin. James nodded in agreement and took her hand. They walked together until they left the cemetery, surrounded by a ringing silence that not even the ubiquitous sparrows disturbed. Rex followed closely behind them, doing just fine without a leash. Amelia squeezed James's hand, and he squeezed it back, as if to say that they weren't alone. Frankly, Amelia didn't know how she was going to live her life, but at the same time she realized that if Benjamin really was the father of this baby, she would accept him as her own in memory of her husband. All the more so because she herself could not have children. She had been unsuccessfully treated in different clinics for a long time. Rex liked James at once. All the way to the cemetery gate, the dog was licking the boy's hand, trying to touch his cheek with his nose. As they passed a mournful row of freshly dug graves, Rex stopped suddenly and whined softly, trying to get closer. Amelia found clods of fresh earth sprinkled on one of the graves, came closer and saw that the dog had already started digging the loose soil with his paws. "Rex, what are you doing?" she asked, concerned. The dog only dug himself deeper into the ground as he continued to whimper. Amelia felt goosebumps run down her spine. She realized that Rex must be feeling something special, something that made him feel very bad. Squatting down beside him, she gently placed her hands on his trembling body. "Who is buried here?" she asked in a whisper. It seemed as if the dog understood every word she said. He whimpered even more, desperately poking his muzzle at the cross. Amelia, overcoming her fear, approached and read the engraved name on the plaque. At that moment, her chest pressed as if someone had squeezed it with an iron hand. In front of her was the grave of the dog's former owner, who had passed away a few days ago. "Oh, Rex," she whispered and leaned against the grave. "You found him at that moment after all." Time and space merged together. Grief, tenderness, and care overflowed Amelia's heart. Rex immediately fell silent, as if realizing that his master was gone. How sad, she sighed. She took a memorial candle from her bag, lit it, and placed it on the edge of the grave. The warm light of the flame illuminated the name on the plaque, creating the illusion of presence. Rex stopped whimpering and got to his feet, signaling that they needed to go home. Little James watched with wide-open eyes, for this was the first time he had ever seen such a thing. They arrived at the house after dark, as this was the first time James and Rex had been here. They froze in the hallway, not knowing where to go next. "Well, have you been thinking, mates? Come in. Don't be afraid, I'll feed you. The bathroom is straight ahead, and to the left," Amelia said with a smile. "Thank you. I like a bath with hot water and bubble bath," James said. The boy's words made Amelia's heart warm. It's a good thing Benjamin decided to have a baby. And even if he wasn't born in marriage to her, it's still nice. It's a piece of his soul, flesh and flesh, she thought. Amelia didn't know for sure that James was Benjamin's own son. But if the little boy calls him daddy, then that's the way it is. Heating up the remains of last night's dinner on the cooker, she sat James at the table and gave Rex his food in a separate bowl placed on the floor. The boy and the dog ate greedily, indicating that they were both systematically undernourished and fed on whatever God sent them. "Andrew, don't," Amelia replied. "I don't want to take it." "Don't refuse the money." "Well, what are you?" Andrew persuaded her. "I promised Benjamin that I would support you. It was his last will and testament." "Please don't." Amelia could barely hold back her tears. "I don't want that money. You've earned this business. Benjamin bequeathed it to you, and you have to move on with it and grow the business together." "Amelia, you know I'd give you the business and all the money," Andrew blurted out. "But it was important to Benjamin that you stay safe. And he was sure I could provide you with a comfortable, quiet life." "Thank you, Andrew," she said gratefully. "But you have to understand, I've never needed anything. I have a job. I'm an orderly in a hospital, but I have enough money, and I want you to use that money as needed. Give it to, I don't know, an orphanage, a center for people with disabilities." "Oh, you're kind, Amelia." Andrew smiled. "All right, I'll gladly use the money as you say. But don't think that the management of these organizations will use it for a good cause. They'll probably take a good chunk of it for themselves. Maybe not even a good piece." Amelia remained silent, thinking of her own. Deep down, she knew Andrew would lie if he had to, but at the same time, her feminine instincts told her otherwise. "Andrew," Amelia began, "I just want to ask you for one little favor." "Please talk." Did Benjamin have children with another woman outside of his marriage? Andrew fell silent. You know, I don't have any information on the subject. Benjamin had no secret life. Andrew, are you sure? She asked. I'm telling you again, Amelia, I don't have any information on the subject. Or maybe you just don't want to tell, she asked and squeezed her hands even tighter. You don't understand me. I don't know anything about it, of course, but you can rest easy. Benjamin had no one but you, said Andrew. It can't be, Amelia thought, but her heart didn't want to believe those words. It was so important to Benjamin that Amelia was safe, and he could be sure of Andrew. But maybe Andrew didn't know her husband as well as he thought he did. Thank you, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm happy for you. Benjamin's business is in good hands now. Thank you, Andrew replied and hung up. Amelia sat and thought, remembering how they had met Benjamin and Andrew. It had been a long time ago, in their third year of university. Benjamin had always been into cinema and Andrew into photography. Usually after going to the cinema, the friends would go to a cafe to have a coffee and discuss their creative plans. Amelia was working in the library at the time and accidentally saw them in one institution. She was fascinated by Benjamin's charisma and his obsession with the world of cinema. It was that day that she fell in love. Since then, Amelia and Benjamin practically never parted, and a couple of years later they played a wedding. Andrew was at the wedding as a witness, and later became a business companion of her husband. At the same time, everyone knew that Benjamin was the brain center of the company. But Andrew did not grab stars from the sky, because he graduated from university and became an economist only thanks to his mate. Among students, Benjamin was called a phenomenon for his ability to add and multiply huge numbers in his head. But in life he was not lucky. He died as a result of an accident, having given the reins to his companion shortly before. Entering the kitchen with a tinge of sadness on her face, Amelia asked, "Listen, James, do you happen to know an Uncle Andrew? You know, the one who cooperated with your dad?" The boy shuddered and dropped the spoon from his hands. In turn, immediately perked up his ears and said, "Uncle Andrew, why, I don't know. I do," James replied. "It was he who brought me to Uncle Benjamin and told him I was his son. And before that he took me to the hospital for some reason. They took blood from me." James' answer shocked Amelia to the core. What's that supposed to mean? Andrew was blatantly lying. Or maybe he was just following the instructions left to him by the late Benjamin. Only two men could know the truth. And one of them was now resting in the city cemetery. And the other was heading his company, becoming the head of a very promising businessman. Deciding not to tell Andrew about her discoveries and suspicions, Amelia returned to the table to chat with James about this and that. The boy was visibly revitalized and feeling much better than he had when he'd first stepped through the door. As it turned out, because of James's stories, Uncle Andrew had seen him at the supermarket, where he wanted to steal something and eat it again. And not even for himself, but for his grandfather, who was ill and could not get out of bed. The boy's mother died in childbirth. There was no one to look after the baby. Andrew stood up for James when a security guard caught him on the way out with a stolen bun worth a penny. The businessman paid not only for the stolen goods themselves, but also compensated for the damage to the shop. However, there was no damage as such. Why did the amount of money smoothly move into the pockets of the cashier and the security guard? Taking James by the hand, Andrew walked him home, but when the boy opened the door, he saw his grandfather lying in the corridor, showing no signs of life. A second heart attack for Mr. Leonard proved fatal, and the elderly man was unable to survive it. To Andrew's credit, he took over the funeral arrangements for James's grandfather, and then began to care for the boy, preparing him to meet his birth father Benjamin. As Amelia listened to the boy's confused story, she could not hold back her tears. How much grief and misery this little boy, who looked like a hunted wolf cub, had had to endure. Just how was her husband related to his mom? James's last name was Green, but that alone didn't mean anything to Amelia. She didn't know any women with that surname, and James himself had never seen his mom in any way, not even in a photograph. Amelia hugged the baby and kissed him on the top of his head, promising to take care of him and help him with everything. She was also relieved to know that James was very independent and could be left home alone, or rather, not quite alone, but with Rex, who would be better than any nanny. And James was bright beyond his years. And understandably so. Deprived of his parents' support, he learnt the secrets of life under the guidance of his grandfather, who had his own view of the world. Having chosen the room as a nursery, Amelia made the guest bed and filled the bathtub with bubble bath. James' joy knew no bounds. He laughed contagiously as he blew bubbles and cheered every time Rex caught one of the balloons, as if they were circus balls. Furtively watching the baby, Amelia felt incomparable relief. Of course, she realized that Benjamin had cheated on her, but on the other hand, he had redeemed himself by leaving a memory of himself in the form of a beautiful little man, who always wanted to cheer her up. Rex, too, was willing to sleep in James's room. Not in bed, of course, but next to him on the mat, like a mute guardian whose shaggy ears were always on the lookout for his little master. The next morning, Amelia woke early and set about preparing breakfast and lunch for James and Rex. The little one couldn't stay hungry until the evening. Amelia had made provision for that. Leaving a note on the table, specially written in block letters, she quietly closed the door behind her so as not to disturb his sweet morning sleep. On her way to work, Amelia thought of the new superintendent, Carl, again. Is he still going to bend his line today and insist on the reward point system? What nonsense is this, really? In the morning peak light, with the sun barely breaking through the roofs of the city's buildings, Amelia hurried to the hospital, making every minute count. She tried to keep up with her schedule, realizing that being late could have serious consequences for her. Suddenly, behind her, Amelia heard a child's shrill cry. When she turned round, she saw a girl flying on a bicycle straight into the carriageway. At that moment, it was as if time had slowed down for her. When Amelia realized the imminent danger, she did not hesitate for a second and rushed towards the little girl. At the same time, there was the screech of brakes and the screams of bystanders. With an incredible twist, Amelia managed to pick up the baby and pull her to safety. A second later, the SUV drove over the bike with a sickening crunch, and the road was immediately strewn with small splinters. The girl's frightened face said she couldn't believe she had miraculously escaped the tragedy. The first thing Amelia did was to calm the child. Gently hugging and cradling her, the little girl trembled. But thankfully, she had no visible injuries. Still choking with sobs, she continued to whisper words of gratitude in the ear of her savior. At that moment, the girl's worried elderly nanny, who had just learnt about the incident, came to them. "Oh my God, thank you so much," she exclaimed with tears in her eyes. "You saved my little princess." Amelia only shrugged her shoulders modestly, signaling that she was glad to have helped. Secretly, she was still proud of herself for not being confused in a critical situation. It was now that she realized the true meaning of her job, not only to save lives within the walls of the hospital, but to be ready to help at any moment. However, the joy of saving lives was overshadowed by the fact that now Amelia was bound to be late for work and would get another reprimand from the head of the hospital. After saying goodbye to the girl and her nanny, Amelia hurried to work. As she approached the hospital, her growing anxiety only increased. She knew she was going to get in trouble from her superiors, especially from Carl, who was strictly following instructions. Imagining his stern look and reproachful tone, Amelia mentally prepared herself for what she would have to say in response. The mood had gone completely sour. After all, only half an hour ago everything had been so good, and now a difficult and unpleasant conversation awaited. And maybe I should give up everything, quit after weighing up the pros and cons. Amelia realized that quitting her job in this situation would be very foolish, especially as she now had a new addition to her family in the form of little James. As soon as she crossed the threshold of the ward for the critically ill, Amelia was practically nose to nose with Carl, who, as usual, looked angry and bossy. "Amelia, where have you been, may I ask?" he began somewhat abruptly and rudely. She lowered her eyes to the floor, her cheeks flaming, her hands nervously clutching the edge of her purse. Amelia drew in a chestful of air to explain herself, but the words were suddenly stuck in her throat. "What's the matter? Have you lost your tongue?" "I want an explanation, not silence," the superintendent exclaimed impatiently. She flapped her eyelashes in despair and rubbed her hands together nervously. "I'm sorry, Carl. I was late for work," because her voice trembled. She couldn't hold back her tears. Carl was surprised. He was used to tears and excuses. Amelia had always had a calm and responsible nature, and her current behavior was confusing. "Wait, breathe," he said more gently. "Calm down and explain what happened." Amelia took a deep breath and told him what had really happened. Carl listened silently, and his stern face gradually softened. "And why were you late for work after that?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes, Carl, that's right," Amelia replied, still worried. "I had to stay with the baby for a while to make sure she was all right." The doctor suddenly walked over to the nurse and took her hand. "Amelia, I'm very grateful to you for saving this little girl. This is my daughter Barbara, okay? She rang me 5 minutes ago and told me she'd nearly been hit by a car on the road. But some brave stranger saved her. I had no idea it was you." Amelia looked away in embarrassment. "You're welcome. I just did what I had to do," she replied. "No, it's really worth a thank you," the superintendent objected. "You saved my daughter's life, and I want to thank you for that. And don't argue with me. I know better what is best for a nurse, and what is not," said Carl. "You did a heroic deed, Amelia. I will not forget it." He thought for a few moments and then continued. "As of today, yes, everyone was shocked when they saw you jump out into the road and push the girl away," Nurse Ben added, "and then you came back to the ward as if nothing had happened." Amelia looked away modestly. Just noticed the little girl was in danger. Couldn't stay away. But not everyone shared her admiration. The nurse Vivian was watching, her face a mixture of envy and gloating. "Look who's the heroine of the day," she hissed through gritted teeth. "All she knows how to do is fidget in front of Carl, and begging for favors," Vivian hissed. Unfortunately, Amelia heard her words. She turned round and met Vivian's gaze. "What are you talking about?" Amelia asked, a look of surprise on the young nurse's face. "What else?" Vivian smirked. "About your supposedly heroic rescue mission. You know Carl's wife has filed for divorce. Are you trying to brighten his loneliness, or are you trying to get his daughter's attention?" What Amelia whispered in amazement. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, you don't?" Vivian interjected mockingly. "I noticed the way you were looking at Carl. Your eyes were glistening. Your life-saving feat was just a way to get his attention." "That's not true." Amelia was outraged. "I helped the girl because it was my duty. I didn't know who she was at all." Of course, Vivian said ironically. "Don't believe it. Everyone knows that the main reason for your actions a cunning, deliberate calculation. And you've made no secret of the fact that you're in love with the head of the eyes. But you miscalculated. After the divorce, Mr. Leonard will remove his ex-son-in-law from this sweet position and send him to some backwater. You weren't born in December, were you?" Amelia opened her mouth in shock. She couldn't believe that her former best friend was accusing her of such unseemly things. "What are you talking about, Vivian?" she exclaimed. "Quiet, don't shout. Everyone will hear your secret," Vivian threatened. "I'm serious, Amelia. If you keep running after Carl, I'm going to tell Mr. Leonard, and I don't think he'll like you using your job to solve your own problems." With those words, Vivian turned and walked away, leaving Amelia standing alone in shock. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clasped her hands to her chest, feeling her heart being torn apart. How could she think that? Amelia asked herself, do her colleagues really think so badly of her? The nurse recalled how from the moment she arrived on the ward, everyone had praised her as hard-working, compassionate, strong, humble. But, as it turned out, envy and self-interest lurked behind these words. Amelia felt her life crumbling before her eyes. She could no longer imagine working side by side with people who thought so badly of her, and how she would look Carl in the eye, knowing that her act could be interpreted as an attempt to get his attention. Fortunately, Amelia was unaware that the ward manager had heard her conversation with Vivienne from beginning to end. Having had his moment, Carl led the older nurse into his office and closed the door. "I have something to tell you, Amelia," he said. "The fact is that it was Vivian who wrote that denunciation against you, that complaint, and it was because of her that I had to give you a preventive talk yesterday morning. It's true, Vivian wrote an anonymous letter, but I've compared the handwriting sample from the note with the handwriting samples on file, so there can be no doubt. It was Vivian who complained about you." Amelia shook her head contritely and thanked her boss for the warning. Seeing the frozen sadness in her eyes, he asked, "Tell me, is there anything else I can help you with? If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." At first, Amelia shook her head negatively, but then suddenly she remembered the DNA test Andrew had done in their clinic. If you, Carl, could pull up the archives and find out what the results were, it would help solve a lot of problems, she said, gathering her breath. Amelia told the superintendent everything that had happened to her over the past few months. She told him about her late husband Andrew's partner, about the hidden camera in the cemetery, about the intimate photos. Carl listened to her in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. Finally, when Amelia finished her story, Carl furrowed his brow and said, "I think I can help you. You'll have to wait a day or two, but there's no other way." Tears glistened in Amelia's eyes. "Thank you so much, Carl," she said. The superintendent just waved his hand. "It's all right. Go, Amelia. I dare not keep you any longer." Throughout the day, the new head nurse had been wondering what the ward manager would find out about Vivian. She simply stopped talking to her, realizing her true rotten nature. To Amelia's surprise, Carl approached her again during the lunch break and, taking her aside, said quietly, "I have inquired about the results of the comparative DNA test conducted with sample number 1, which belonged to your late husband Benjamin, and sample number 2, which is directly related to James Green." At this point, the superintendent suddenly stopped talking and squinted at Amelia. What did the test reveal? She couldn't stand it. Carl shook his head and then gave her a startling answer. Benjamin and James are completely devoid of any family connection. Accordingly, under no circumstances can they be father and son. Moreover, the man who provided these samples, Andrew Smith, offered the genetics expert a substantial bribe to officially establish paternity between Benjamin and James. But the expert did not take the money, and also wrote a report on him. We have a copy, by the way. I think now would be a good time to go to the police. A tear rolled down Amelia's cheek, and her lips trembled. Oh my God, what was this? Andrew had deliberately deceived Benjamin, pretending to be his illegitimate son, she said, unable to find an answer to the question. Amelia did not resist and went to the police. At first, the operatives expressed doubts that there was a criminal element to the case. But when Andrew was called in for questioning, he broke down and grabbed a pen and started writing a confession. Andrew was so tired of waiting to be arrested. He was as happy to see the police as a sick person is happy to see the ambulance staff arriving on time. As it turns out, it was all greed. Envious of his more fortunate companion, Andrew decided to nail him. To do this, he used an old story when 7 years ago Benjamin had too much alcohol and found himself in the arms of his secretary Helen. True, nothing really happened. Benjamin simply fell asleep in his chair. But Andrew presented it as adultery, thus obtaining reliable dirt against his companion. Time passed, and there was no opportunity to use it. It is worth saying that after the incident at the corporate party, Helen's secretary resigned to avoid rumors, but Andrew still used her name for his own purposes. After the woman died in the accident, the cunning companion presented everything in a completely different light, making Benjamin believe that his former secretary died of massive hemorrhage during a difficult delivery. The businessman quickly put 2 + 2 together and came up with a timeline. The realization of the gruesome truth, invented by Andrew, overwhelmed Benjamin, depriving him of peace for a long time. At the same time, the businessman was very afraid that Amelia would find out about the alleged affair and his illegitimate son. For this very reason, Benjamin succumbed to Andrew's blackmail to rewrite the company in his name with the preservation of a monthly allowance for Amelia. And then everything was a matter of technique, cleverly organizing an assassination attempt on Benjamin and making it look like an accident at the lake. Andrew became the sole owner of the entire business. Although Benjamin himself was also to blame if he had told Amelia about everything would have fallen into place. But the businessman simply did not have time to do so, all the while thinking about what he would say to his wife when she looked into his eyes and learnt about Andrew's monstrous deception. Amelia could not hold back her tears. After all, in essence, Benjamin was not guilty of anything. Moreover, he had nothing to do with the birth of little James. What was there to do now? Should I tell James that he was no longer her son? Or tell him that Uncle Andrew had made an unfortunate mistake? Naturally, Amelia didn't. What's more, having secured Carl's support, she filed the paperwork to formalize James as her son. Given her excellent work record, a favorable decision, running away from ungrateful children into the wilderness, Margaret found a photo in the attic. The school's small assembly hall was filled with students in resplendent prom dresses and fancy suits with tied ribbons. They took turns on the stage, where a tall, formidable woman with a joyful smile of the principal handed them their diplomas. A short woman in dark glasses and a long green dress stood next to her. She hugged everyone who received the cherished book and cried on their shoulder. "The gold medal for excellent studies goes to Margaret Swan," the principal said loudly into the microphone. A skinny girl in a red dress, in the color of her certificate, and with a long white braid, rose from the hall and headed to the stage. She was given a medal, red certificates, and a small bunch of flowers. The girl went up to her class teacher, a woman in a long green dress. "My dear child, how happy I am for you." The woman hugged Margaret. "You have a brilliant future ahead of you. I'm sure you are smart, kind, purposeful. You will definitely achieve everything you want. Do you understand?" The girl often nodded and hugged her class teacher. "Thank you for everything." Margaret came down from the stage and sat down in the hall, continuing to watch the awarding of certificates. Suddenly, someone jumped up to her and whispered something in her ear. Margaret opened her eyes wide and jumped up from her seat. She had decided to leave the child in the orphanage. "Do you understand?" shouted the girl's mother. "We must do something, not sit here." "Let's go," ordered Margaret, and they ran towards the house, which was not far away. The girl ran into the house and saw her older sister, who had already packed a bag for the baby and was holding the girl in her arms. "Vivi, what are you going to do? You're not just going to leave this girl at the orphanage, are you?" Margaret asked hopefully, looking at her sister, who had gathered her long dark hair into a thick braid and was wearing a tracksuit. She was unattractive now, not like herself, the usually bright and stately girl around whom crowds of boys hovered. "You don't understand." Margaret Vivi shook the baby. "It's what keeps me from living my life. It's draining me of all my strength, and it's screaming all the time. And I can't take it anymore," Vivi said indignantly. "It's driving me crazy, making me act like I'm a freak." Margaret approached her sister slowly, shaking her head. "It's her, not it. How do you not understand? It's a child. You can't just do that to it. You can't abandon her, you can't put her in an orphanage, do you understand?" the girl said almost pitifully. "Then take her for yourself." Vivi put the crying girl in Margaret's arms. "Spare me the screaming and the crying and all that. I don't want it. I don't want to hear her howling every night." Without hearing her sister's reply, Vivi walked over and shoved the bag with the baby's things into her hands. "Look, you can't leave her," Margaret exclaimed, looking into the girl's big blue eyes. "What do you mean I can't?" "I can give her anywhere the social workers. It doesn't make any difference." The baby cried and Margaret began to rock her, trying to soothe her. When she looked up, her sister was gone. Only the wind blew from the ajar door. 25 years later, a large wall clock struck 6 in the morning. The hand indicated the early hour, when everyone who didn't have to get up early for work was asleep. But Margaret was already at the stove, cooking oatmeal and scrambled eggs. Kieran didn't eat porridge, he liked eggs with bacon. His loving mother was trying to please his tastes. Kieran and Matthew had to be up early for work at 8 in the morning, and Margaret had to leave half an hour earlier. So they had to get up at 6 to make breakfast, iron shirts, and walk the dog. The dog ran up to his mistress, wagging his tail merrily. Margaret wasn't really his owner. Kira had gotten him for herself, but then she'd married Andrew, who was allergic to fur. That's how, completely unnoticed, the poor animal ended up in a small 2-room apartment. After finishing her chores, Margaret began to get ready for work. She was an ordinary school teacher, teaching geography in a small school. Since childhood, she had dreamed of traveling. However, life happened, so that she had only seen other countries in pictures and textbooks. Traveling to work took Margaret a lot of time. She rode a bicycle because she did not have a car. The family had 2 cars, one for Matthew and one for Kieran. Margaret helped them buy these cars. Matthew was the first to get a used car for his 18th birthday. But soon his younger brother envied him. The woman had to take a loan to please her favorite son. Mom, of course, they did not drive to work. They were waiting for a hard day's work, which required rest and sleep. In good weather, Margaret would ride her bicycle to work, but in snow or rain, she could take the bus. Margaret had a best friend, the energetic Stacy. They had met at school when Margaret came to apply for a job as a geography teacher after college. Stacy taught biology and often visited her friend to chat about life and discuss the latest news. This day was no exception. When Margaret arrived at the school, she learned that the 11th graders had been taken away to prepare for the last bell, so she had no class. Stacy, who had handed out test papers to the noisy 5th graders, had quietly retired to a nearby office to check the exam schedule. She caught Margaret checking her notebooks. "Girlfriend, do you ever get any rest?" she asked. Margaret lifted her big blue eyes and removed her glasses from her face. She looked at her friend with a mixture of squint and bewilderment. "I didn't have time to check on the house last night. I'd stayed up late cleaning the bathroom. Then I had to wash the stain on Matthew's white shirt. He likes it very much," Margaret said. "What time did you go to bed?" Stacy asked lazily, anticipating the answer. She had known Margaret for years and was aware of all her household chores. Margaret shrugged her shoulders, put her notebook aside, and stood up from the table. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded at the kettle. Stacy nodded. 2 o'clock, I think. I can't remember, to be honest. Kieran was up late watching some really interesting movie, and I couldn't sleep, Margaret admitted. Stacy rolled her eyes. I still can't understand why you're sleeping in the same room as Kieran while Matthew is alone. Aren't kids supposed to be in the same room? She muttered. And they're hardly children. They're not thinking of moving out of their mother's house. They're both well into their third decade. Margaret shook her head and remained silent. She thought her friend's talk was nonsense. Stacy herself had married much later than Margaret and had had a daughter 15 years ago. It was certainly not her place to talk about such things. "How's Digit?" Stacy asked, putting sugar in her mug. Margaret shrugged. She and Andrew had a fight the other day. I don't know how things are going over there. I try to stay out of their lives. You know she should be very grateful to you, Stacy said with a bit of pressure. Why would I put that in my head? Margaret was the only one who got the hint. You're too good a mom for her. Margaret shrugged her shoulder uncertainly, slightly embarrassed. She understood what Stacy meant, and she hated that her friend had brought up such an unpleasant subject. How's your Joshua? He sent me some pictures from the university the other day. I'll show you. Stacy smiled and reached for her cell phone, which was full of pictures of her nephew at the university in the capital. Margaret came home before her sons for the first time in a long time. Usually she stayed up late with her failing students or checked a mountain of notebooks. Today she excused an 8th grade boy in honor of his birthday and left the notebooks behind. Then the next day, her daughter called and asked to meet. Kira didn't see her mother often, and this was an event for Margaret. She hurried home to make her daughter's favorite pie. Kira arrived early. Margaret had not yet had time to take the pie out of the oven when the doorbell rang. The woman hurried to open it, trying not to trip over the cachapuri running around her former landlady. On the threshold stood her tall, red-haired daughter in a beautiful red dress. The girl smiled at her mother and threw herself around her neck, comfortably intercepting the box of chocolates. Mommy, I'm so happy to see you, Kira said enthusiastically. What smells so good? Margaret smiled and called into the kitchen. Guess if it's my favorite cherry pie? Mommy, you're great. The girl rushed into the kitchen, petting the dog on the way. Margaret hurried to take the pie out of the oven before it burned. Kira started making tea. How are you two doing? Margaret asked, cutting into the steaming, flavorful pie. Kira smiled broadly and shrugged her shoulders. Andrew and I made up. He gave me 27 roses in honor of the number of months we've been together, and then he took me to a rooftop restaurant. You should have seen how beautiful it was. Margaret smiled, happy for her daughter, and put the cake on the table. She sat down on a stool. Kira set out several fragrant mugs of tea and sat down opposite, settling herself deftly. I haven't called them in a while, Margaret shrugged, setting the pie down for herself and her daughter. Kieran's studying, he's almost done his diploma. And Matthew? I think he's got a girlfriend. But he won't tell me anything, can you imagine? Though I don't bother. That's right, Kira nodded. He's a big boy now. We're only a year and a half apart. I think he already knows what he should do with a girl. Kira laughed. Margaret picked up her laughter and shook her head. You know, Andrew and I have decided to take out a mortgage so we can have our own place, her daughter continued. Soon we will have children, and it is difficult to raise them in a rented apartment. Why are you making excuses? Margaret exclaimed. It's all right. I raised you in a foreign city, in an apartment that didn't belong to us. So having your own apartment is the right thing to do. Are you saying that to share or to get my approval? Kira asked, setting the mug aside. The smile came off her lips. She looked out the window, then at the leg of the kitchen table. and finally shifted her gaze to her mother. It's not one thing or the other, you know. To get a mortgage, you need a down payment. Andrew and I don't have that kind of money right now. Margaret left her cup of tea too and looked at her daughter carefully. Do you want me to give you money? Kira shrugged his shoulders. I know you have some. You'll buy for a vacation abroad. There's not only money for vacations, but for a rainy day. Margaret said slowly. The joy of her daughter's arrival had already waned, and the woman spoke with a note of sadness, foreshadowing an unpleasant conversation. Do you want me to give you the last of my savings? Not exactly, Kira answered. How can I explain to you that we need that money? We need a place to live. As soon as Andrew gets his bonus, we'll pay you back a part of it, and then. The woman raised her hand in front of her, asking her daughter to shut up, and pressed her lips together. She didn't like to say no to her daughter, couldn't stand saying no to her children, but sometimes she had to. You haven't paid me back the money you borrowed for Andrew's car almost a year ago. You promised me that you'd give it all back to me with the bonus. And then it was vacation money too, the last one. Kira rolled her eyes. Mom, you're being dramatic. You're the one who will remember every penny of it. Margaret grinned bitterly and shook her head. I'm not reminiscing about every penny. I'm just asking you to be a little more attentive to your mother. You didn't even come to my birthday party. You forgot your brother's graduation and missed your grandmother's funeral. I was working, Kira exclaimed. So was I. But for some reason I always came to your birthday parties. And even when you and Andrew quarreled for the first time, and you sat and cried on the embankment in the rain, I took off work and came. Don't you remember that? Kira looked away and pressed her lips together, just like her mother had done a few minutes ago. So you won't give me the money then? Margaret shook her head. Kira jumped up from her seat, nearly dropping her chair, and rushed to the door. Thanks for your help, Mommy, the girl said, slamming the door. The woman lowered her head. Tears flowed from Margaret's eyes. She could no longer contain herself. Large salty drops fell on the white tablecloth. Her sobs could be heard throughout the apartment. Something clenched in the woman's chest, causing unbearable pain. In the evening, when Margaret had calmed down and was minding her own business, her sons returned. Mom, are you home? Nick called out. Margaret responded. From the kitchen, she was preparing dinner for her sons. I asked you to iron the white shirt yesterday, and you ironed the blue one. Like a fool, I came to the open house alone in blue, Nick complained. The woman rolled her eyes tiredly. She probably would have tolerated it another time. But after her conversation with Kira, she'd been on edge. The white one hung in the closet. It wasn't that hard to get it out and iron it. It would have taken a couple minutes. Was it hard for you to memorize my request? She asked capriciously. Nick entered the kitchen. Margaret turned sharply in his direction and threw the towel back on the refrigerator. You're almost 22 years old. You're a grown guy, running around dating girls and looking for a prestigious job. And you ask your mom to iron your damn shirt. Are you going to hide behind your mother's skirt for the rest of your life, just like your bad father? Said the woman loudly, throwing off her apron. And you sleep in your brother's room now. I'm a grown woman and I want to spend my free time in peace, not listening to your conversations and watching movies at 2 a.m. Earthquakes are caused by the shifting of tectonic plates. The most seismically active zones in our country are Kamchatka and Sakhalin Island. There is also the largest volcano there, Klushevskaya Sopka. It is very dangerous to live there. There is a risk of an earthquake or volcanic eruption. Japan is also in a seismically active zone. Shifts of tectonic plates also cause the formation of large mountain massifs. The higher the mountain, the earlier it formed. So one plate is thrust over another, Margaret said slowly and measuredly, scrolling through her pen and occasionally looking out the window. Margaret liked to teach lessons, but sometimes she purposely forgot her homework and taught new material, ignoring the bustle and chatter of the students. There was a reason for that now. Her mind was reeling over the past day, and she couldn't figure out who was right and who was wrong. Margaret thought she had been too harsh with the children. After all, it wasn't Vincent's fault that she had forgotten about the white shirt. Kira was just beginning her adult life, and she needed her parents' support. Besides, comparing her son to his father was wrong. Margaret was sure she'd managed to raise her sons differently from their father, who'd abandoned the family for another woman. Vincent did sleep in his brother's room. In the morning, Margaret didn't say anything to them and, resentful, went to work to check the notebooks left over from the previous day. It seemed so wrong. But an inner voice, still offended by her daughter's words, argued that Margaret had done the right thing. The woman's musings were interrupted by the creak of the door, which slowly opened, and a short, blonde-haired boy entered the study. He tossed his backpack beside his desk and sat down, grinning and glaring at the teacher. Margaret, surprised at this insolence of a student, stood up from her desk to tower over the 8th grader. Someone started laughing. All thoughts of home and problems with the children immediately popped into Margaret's mind. She looked at the boy, at his grin and his cocky face, and immediately remembered her children, Kira's face when she'd heard her mother wouldn't give her money, Vincent's face when he'd wondered about the shirt. And the woman snapped. "Swan, get up from the table quickly," Margaret said sternly, "or your parents will be called to the school, and you'll be out of here immediately." She glared angrily at the student. Every movement, every sound, every smirk, and every movement made her dislike him. "Really?" The boy grinned. "Do you know who my father is to talk like that?" "You spoiled Mama's boy, Swan." Margaret continued in a harsh tone. "Leave my office immediately," the boy said irritably. "What are you going to do? Drool on a child? You're a loser like all the teachers in this school, working for a pittance, dissatisfied with your life, hating children. I can tell you haven't had a man in a long time, Margaret." Margaret opened her mouth and gasped with indignation. Her hands clenched into fists. She looked at the boy and saw only evil incarnate. The woman grabbed the schoolboy's backpack with one hand, his ear with the other, and hurried toward the door. She almost threw the boy into the hallway, then threw his briefcase after him, which hit the concrete floor and the contents spilled out. "Get out, you little rascal," shouted the woman. "Shove your insolence where you belong, and don't you dare come to this office again. You nasty, brainless boy." Margaret slammed the door angrily. To her surprise, there were shocked teachers standing in the hallway. The woman shifted her gaze to the children and saw the frightened looks on their faces. They looked at her with fear, clutching at their desks. Margaret sighed and returned to her seat. The students ducked into their books. After all that had happened, Margaret pondered the boy's words. He had a point. The teachers at the school worked for low wages, tolerated the insolent remarks of the students, and were unhappy with their lives. Every day she watched herself, Stacy, and the other co-workers. They were all terribly tired, with lots of problems at home and at school. Someone who had succumbed to life's hardships, the kids were afraid. Some who chose tactics of indifference, the kids loved. The second option belonged to those teachers who happily went home, letting the children go home a few lessons early, not conducting tests and talking to them on extraneous topics. Oh yes, those kids loved them. True. Then in colleges and universities, they cried about not knowing English or physics. The reason was the teachers who chose their peace. But those who tried to give children knowledge were not loved. And Margaret was one of those who tried to combine the two tactics. Margaret meekly tolerated the attacks of students like that blonde-haired, bald-headed boy Swan. She went along when kids asked to be let off early on Fridays or the last day of the quarter, while still trying to teach lessons and provide knowledge. The woman never thought the day would come when her kindness would only lead to trouble. There were few students like Swan, but the few that did take advantage of her teacher's kindness grew more and more insolent as time went on. The school disliked teachers most of all because Joshua held out a glass of water and shook his head. He folded his wrinkled hands on the table, squeezing them into a lock with force. I'd love to keep this thing quiet, but you have to realize the school doesn't want trouble with his powerful father. We'll lose funding and be plagued with inspections. All the teachers will be sent in for background checks. It's easier for me to leave the school, Margaret concluded quietly, taking a drink of water. Resentment and despair squeezed her throat, cutting off her oxygen supply. The woman was almost out of breath. The school was part of her life. She'd worked there for over 20 years. The office, the children, the lessons, the notebooks, it all seemed so familiar. It couldn't be otherwise. And now that part was being taken away from her, leaving her soul torn to shreds. I'll let you leave on your own. I'll try to keep the conflict quiet so the details don't get out beyond the walls of the school. But you realize it's hard to hide something like this. Everyone will talk, and the kids will bring other stories to their parents. If you ever want to work in a school, it won't be in our town. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and memories of days gone by flashed before her. She could clearly see the day she had to leave her hometown so that she and Kira could have a normal life. History was repeating itself. The town where she had raised 3 children, found friends, a job, and co-workers had to be left. It was as if fate mocked her every time life seemed to fall into place. With a black pen left over from her exams, Margaret wrote a letter of resignation. Her sprawling teacher's signature flaunted on the white sheet, letting the woman know that this was the end. The end of normal life, the end of everything she had. "Can I take my things back?" the woman asked quietly. Joshua nodded. "Sure, Margaret, you can come say goodbye to the kids, to your co-workers. Maybe when this boy graduates, you'll be able to go back again." "Thank you, Joshua," Margaret nodded. "I'm grateful for the kindness, for all you've done for me." When Margaret came to work at the school, Joshua was the vice principal and physics teacher. He treated with kindness the young girl, who was not even 20 when she came to work before she had finished her studies. He helped her get on the waiting list for housing for a young family. He let her go when Kira was sick, stayed with her during maternity leave, and helped the young girl in many ways. Margaret was grateful to him for that. With a stone in her heart, Margaret went into the study to retrieve her things and a few books. She was followed in by Stacy, who, only seeing her friend's hard stare, shook her head. She immediately realized what had happened. "The principal gave me time to pack and say goodbye. He's wrong. It's not your fault what happened. We all wanted to do that to that underling, Stacy." I forced him out into the hallway, and he fell to the concrete floor. Thank God he didn't hurt himself. Not only would I have been sued, but I wouldn't have been able to forgive myself. Margaret exhaled and sat back in her seat, covering her face with her hands. I understand that this is a difficult situation for Margaret. The fact that she was given the opportunity to resign is not a bad thing, because many people would have been fired with a reprimand on their record for such an incident. Stacy walked over to her friend and lightly hugged her from behind. She rested her head on her shoulder for moral support. "The house is a mess," Margaret said. "I had a fight with Jessica. She asked for money for the mortgage. I said no. It's all because of that. You see, if I'd given the money, everything would have been all right. But no. Nothing would have been okay," Stacy replied sharply. "They're adults, and they're sitting on your neck. You couldn't stand it, if not now, then later. And you need to start your life without them. They're your kids, I get it, but you don't have to give them all of yourself. You've done too much for them already, especially for her." Margaret shook her head, staring down at her desk. She saw notebooks, textbooks, pens, and a newspaper. The woman grabbed it and shoved it at the pages of advertisements. Look, Margaret jabbed her finger at a small ad on the last page. There's a cabin for sale cheap in the next county. This village borders the town where my grandmother lived. She died a long time ago, but I remember how beautiful it was there. So buy it. Stacy exclaimed. I know you have the money, and you could almost go back to your hometown. It's right next to your hometown. Margaret nodded. You can start a new life away from the children of powerful people who don't know how to raise them. Do you think it's worth it? The peace of mind, Margaret asked thoughtfully. Yes, replied Stacy with conviction. Stacy's husband Jason helped Margaret move things into her new home. The woman had packed everything up while the children were out of the house. She left them a short note and left, determined to start a new life. It seemed so strange at 40+ years old to start over. Stacy didn't understand her friend's worries, but she kept cheering her up. The house was not far from Margaret's hometown. A 40-minute bus ride would take her to the cemetery where her mother and father were buried. I realized that for Margaret it was a difficult but exciting start to a new chapter in her life. Although the cottage seemed a little dilapidated, it had potential. Jason said it could be repaired, the roof could be fixed, the kitchen floor could be redone. There was gas, the walls were solid, and there was even some furniture left. The man shifted his gaze to the broken chair Stacy sat in. Almost whole, he grinned. How's your money doing? Jason asked. Margaret shrugged. I spent most of it on the house, of course, and haven't added to my savings in a while. However, it will be enough for the first time. Maybe I can even pay for the roof repairs. Do you think that's expensive? Jason scratched the back of his head and looked at the roof. If you hire a crew, it's not cheap. But you can find local men in the village and they'll do it cheaper. The main thing is not to hire drunks, they will sing more than work. Margaret grinned. I'll know. Okay, thank you guys. You've been a big help. Stacy waved goodbye to her friend and got in her car. She had to get to the rehearsal for the 9th grade prom. Margaret stepped out of the house and looked around more closely. It was small, 4 rooms, a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a hall. There was also a small porch, but it was a summer porch. Consider it for a separate room, she thought. It seemed to the woman that she was very lucky to buy a house for such a small amount of money. When she asked the seller why it was so cheap, he said that the village was dying out. The school might be closed soon. No one wants to buy houses there. Besides, he had gotten the house by chance from a deceased great-aunt, so he didn't value it much. There was a lot of work to be done to improve the house, but Margaret was ready for it. She was alone at last. Margaret spent more than 3 days cleaning the old house. On the 4th, she left the most difficult part of the job, the attic. She was afraid to go up there. It didn't look safe, and it was much dirtier than the other rooms. It looked like no one had been up there in 20 years, if not more. The woman set her bag down beside her and slowly climbed through the trapdoor in the ceiling. Margaret almost fell in, but when she found herself at the top, she realized there was more work than she thought. The attic was full of boxes and old trunks where women had stored their belongings long ago. Margaret decided to start sorting through the boxes to throw away anything that wasn't needed. Rolling up her sleeves, she sighed and sat down on the dusty floor. The first 3 boxes were of women's things. The 4th contained children's toys. Margaret took them apart at first, winding up dolls and wiping down dusty cars. But then she gave up the useless endeavor and left the box. Another box had albums of photographs. Margaret leafed through them, marveling at the happiness of the people in the pictures, and set them aside. The farthest box was small and light. Margaret opened it and aghast. On the very top was a wooden frame containing a picture of her sister Vivi and a strange guy. They were hugging and looking happily into the camera lens. Vivi, Margaret whispered with shaky hands, snatching the photo away. The girl looked exactly as she remembered her long, thick black hair, dark eyes, sharp facial features, and a narrow nose. Margaret hadn't seen her sister in over 25 years. She was sure she was dead. Seeing a picture of Vivi happy seemed very strange and brought bitterness to her soul. Margaret pulled out the frame and saw a small wooden box with 2 letters VI carved into it. The woman unlocked it and saw a small pendant in the shape of a scarab beetle and a Vera pendant. Underneath it lay another photograph. This picture only showed a guy in uniform. On the back was written the year. Margaret gasped in surprise the year of her daughter's birth. The man was smiling. A letter lay next to it. Margaret unfolded it and, smiling, began to read the lines. Dear Vivi, I am writing to you, hoping for a reply. You have not answered for so long that I was afraid something had happened to you. Grandma should be coming to visit soon. I hope you'll be with her. I missed you madly. Your hair the color of night and your piercing eyes that looked straight into my soul. I can't live without the touch of your velvet skin. A day without you is agony, and I haven't seen you in 5 months. I miss our moonlit lounges and long late-night conversations. I hope all is well with you. Your lover. Margaret sighed sadly. This seemed to be the child's father. There were others under that envelope. With each letter, Alex grew more and more worried. He wrote that he missed her and couldn't be without Vivi. In the last letter he wrote, Grandma was in the other day and told me that you went to your house and never came back. I have no idea what happened. Probably you found someone else richer or prettier. I don't know. I hope you're happy. In case you're wondering, I've decided to stay in the army on a contract. You probably won't read this. I don't know your new address, so I'm writing to my grandmother's address. Alex. Alex seemed to really love Vivi. However, she wasn't there for her. She needed something else, not just love. She was looking for something different. Margaret went downstairs. She didn't want to read the letters anymore. It bored her. She felt sorry for Alex. He wrote such beautiful lines. About Vivi. Vivi was her own person. All the years as the older sister, she had acted like she was a couple years younger than Margaret. The then still young girl had to deal with her problems and hide their consequences from her ailing father. If something happened to Vivi, everyone ran to Margaret, and she dealt with all the problems. A broken window, missing money from her father's stash, late returns, and more. Vivi never thought about the feelings of others. Alex was no exception. Margaret cooked potatoes and cucumbers she'd bought from her neighboring grandmother on the old, salted stove and sat down to dinner. The food, however, did not go down her throat. She looked at the seemingly appetizing potatoes and cucumbers, but could not swallow a bite. Everything seemed terribly bland and unpalatable. The reason for this was thoughts of her sister. Margaret hadn't seen her sister in over 25 years. She didn't even know if Vivi was still alive. Now her conscience began to plague her for that. Vivi was her sister, whatever she was, and so she couldn't just abandon her. We have to find her, Margaret said firmly, and took a bite of cucumber. A clear plan formed in Margaret's mind. She saw no obstacle to finding her sister. The letters had stirred her soul. The next morning, Margaret went upstairs to go through the boxes looking for something that might help find Vivi. There was nothing useful in the letters. At the very bottom of one of the boxes, however, was an old notebook with lots of numbers and addresses in it. The numbers were probably invalid. It had been so long, but the addresses could be verified. Margaret could safely say that the book belonged to her sister. She could recognize Vivi's crooked handwriting from 1,000 sprawling letters in the long, intricate curls. At the very end of the book was a name, Diakova Janie. Next to the name was written, Call. Help Vivi had a habit of signing everything she could so she wouldn't forget. She always carried a notebook with her and wrote in it the names of suitors, the places and times she met them so she wouldn't get them mixed up. Margaret had laughed at this habit before, but now she realized there was nothing wrong with it. She tore out the sheet with Janie's name on it and stuffed it in her pocket. Sure, it had been a while, but maybe this Janie could help find Vivi. The woman finished all the chores around the house. She asked her neighbors for the best bus ride to the address in the book and planned the trip. She left early the next day. Margaret was glad to be back in her hometown, to walk through familiar places from her childhood, and to remember the past. The woman walked past the school and smiled as she saw the windows of her class and remembered her graduation. She had been predicted a successful future then. Margaret knew what university she was going to attend and was seriously preparing for the exams. And then what happened happened. The house she needed to go to was on the very outskirts of the city. The poorest families lived in that neighborhood. In Margaret's class, only 2 classmates were from that neighborhood. They walked around in shabby clothes and often bruised. Both dropped out of school after 9th grade and moved into the dormitory. Margaret hoped that their lives were better than during their high school years. The basement where Janie's apartment was supposed to be was doorless. Margaret walked slowly inside, looking around cautiously. "We'll put it up soon," said the man smoking on the bench hoarsely. He smelled foul, probably of alcohol and cheap cigarettes. Margaret smiled, nodded, and quickly went inside before the man said anything more. The entryway had the same odor as a smoker, with a dash of urine scents. The woman sighed and headed for the 3rd floor. The apartment she was looking for had to be there. There was no elevator, of course. Apartment 11 was on the 3rd floor. It had a massive metal door with obscene writing on it. The bell was recessed into the wall. Margaret pressed the button and carefully removed her hand. It was unknown if it worked or not. A moment later, she heard heavy footsteps and grumbling outside the door. "Who's in there?" The door swung open. A tall, full woman with disheveled hair, wearing a laundered bathrobe with a grease stain on her chest, stood on the threshold. "Hello. Are you Janie Dakova?" Margaret smiled. "Why?" The woman looked her over from head to toe. "You see, I'm looking for my sister. Her name is Vivi. She wrote your address in her address book." The woman made an inarticulate, throaty sound and laughed. "I haven't heard from her in years. I owed her something, so I helped her about 30 years ago. Maybe less." "When was the last time you saw her?" Margaret asked. Janie shrugged. "I'm telling you, it was about 30 years ago. No, wait, about 25. The neighbor's little boy was still born then. His mom was here yelling when she went into labor that day, and we just celebrated his 25th birthday." "What did she want? Where'd she go?" Janie grumbled. "She came running, and everyone took off, asked for help finding a place to live. But I gave her the number of someone I knew who had a room for rent in a communal apartment in the neighborhood. She took it and ran." "Could you give me the address?" Margaret asked. Janie grinned and held out her hand. "We don't give out information for free." Margaret rolled her eyes but reached into her purse. She pulled out a 3-0 bill, handed it to the woman, and tilted her head. Janie went back into the house, tore a small slip from the wall calendar, and wrote the address on it in scrawled handwriting. "Here you are, Snow White. You're the only one who has nothing to catch there." The woman shrugged her shoulders. "Why not? I heard she got married, so I don't think she's ever been in this dump. It's been so many years yet." Margaret had been told that phrase too often lately. She braced herself, snatched the paper with the address out of the woman's hand, and walked away. "Thank you," Margaret mumbled politely. She wanted to wash up after being in that entryway, so she went home. She'd have time to go to the address. The next day, Margaret went to the school to ask about the vacancy. She had no intention of going home. Of course, the kids called her, but she didn't answer. That's what Stacy had said. Her opinion was one the woman usually listened to. Of course, it was heavy on her heart that she hadn't answered her sons. However, for the first time in a long time, the woman felt free. The school was small, 2-story, with windows open everywhere. May was hot, and there were children with countenances running in the street. Next to them was a short woman with white hair and wearing a long skirt. She was giving instructions and periodically approached the girls who were planting flowers. "Petrova, haven't you ever planted flowers? What is this? You should have covered it all the way with earth," the teacher said. Margaret chuckled softly and walked over to the woman. "Excuse me, could you tell me where the principal's office is?" she asked. "Good afternoon," the teacher smiled. "Are you someone's mom?" "Oh no, I wanted to get a job," Margaret replied. "My children are grown up now. I just moved to your village and I need a job. I thought you might have something here," Margaret told the teacher. "Are you a geographer by training?" "Oh, we have a vacancy for a geographer. But you could go and see Kieran Vincent and see what you can find. First floor, 3rd office. Go in and walk straight ahead. His door's on the left. Don't miss it." Margaret nodded gratefully and went into the school. The principal's door was indeed where the woman had said. Margaret knocked. "Come in," came a muffled voice. "Hello, my name is Margaret Swan. I'm a geography teacher. I've just moved here and I need a job." Esmeralda nodded and smiled broadly. "My name is Esmeralda. I'm the headmistress. Sit down. Tea, coffee?" Margaret shook her head and sat down. "The geographer's place is unfortunately taken. But we have a vacant place for a teacher of technology and labor. And you will hardly agree to teach Russian," Esmeralda clarified. Of course, Margaret nodded. "Isn't there a technology class there? Isn't it?" "Tana taught that. She's a biologist, but she can't work 2 jobs. You know, she teaches everyone biology, and she's the class teacher. She's also the head teacher. You know, it's a lot of work." "Then I could take the place of the technology teacher," Margaret smiled. "Would you?" Esmeralda shook her head. "There's no point in signing you up now. Let's start with the new school year. But you probably need a job right now, don't you?" "That would be nice," Margaret grinned, remembering how much money she had left in her account. "We're short a teacher at the day camp in July. Would you agree?" Margaret nodded. Esmeralda took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote something on it. Grinning, the woman waved her hand in the direction of the house and went to cook dinner herself. Alex really stayed at Margaret's place. He ordered material for the fence and even fixed the roof. All morning he had been climbing on it, tapping and drilling. After lunch, he climbed down, clapped his hands together and said, "Take the job, mistress. It won't last forever, of course, but it'll do for a couple months." "Thank you. Let's go inside. I bought some kvass from my neighbor. Would you like some homemade?" Sure, the man smiled broadly, stretching his crescent-shaped scar. Every day Alex did something new in the house. Then he ate Margaret's lunches and praised them. It was a mandatory routine. The woman noticed that the uninvited neighbor was very good-looking. He's tall, trim, strong. He was also hardworking. Alex was nothing like Margaret's ex-husband. All he did was lie on the couch after a hard day's work. Every weekend, he went to a bar with his friends. Even the day Matthew had a fever of 40 degrees was no exception. Margaret called an ambulance, and during the examination, her husband came back to the house, barely standing on his feet. He yelled at the doctor, and then went to sleep in the middle of the living room. Margaret was terribly ashamed at the time, and the doctor advised her to leave such a husband. Margaret's new neighbor was quite different, sensitive and intelligent. He kept up conversations about books and various places. "I've been to Prague," he said. A coworker had gone there, and I was visiting him. Margaret only smiled dreamily at the stories of various places. "I've always wanted to travel. But first there was Stacy, then Matthew, and then Vince. Besides, a teacher's salary doesn't really allow for traveling." "Why a teacher?" Alex asked and leaned back in his chair. He and Margaret were sitting across from each other in the living room. After a hard day, they were planting potatoes. Of course, it was late the end of May. But the neighbor gave a few buckets and said that if Margaret was going to stay living in the settlement, it was better to plant a vegetable garden. Alex, as usual, didn't stay away. "I wasn't going to go to pedagogy," Margaret admitted. "But then Yuji showed up. I blew the entrance exams, moved to another city to avoid the ridicule of the neighbors. And I went to the pedagogy school there as a part-time student. I barely graduated and went to work. That's the secret. I love being around kids, but it's hard. I got kicked out for throwing a student out into the hallway by force." There was a whistling sound in the room. Alex shook his head in surprise. "Are you serious? That was wrong. I will try to do the editing of the text, keeping it close to the original and following your instructions." Margaret shook her head. "Besides, he was the son of a judge. I also screwed over the school I worked at. Either you have a demon inside you, or that boy was that bad at geography." The woman thought back sadly to that day. "Geography had nothing to do with it," she said. "He was just cocky and overconfident, and I was too upset and angry. But, everything that's done is done for the best, isn't it? I found my sister, and you ended up without a daughter. Yeah, it's definitely for the best." There was silence, which was broken only by the sound of an insect flying around the room. Alex couldn't find anything to say, so he just kept silent. Alex and Margaret grew closer. They sat and talked more and more often. In the evenings, he talked about the war and the army, she about children and school. Sometimes they went to help an old lady neighbor who rarely had children over. First they cleaned her house, then they helped in the vegetable garden. Alex also fixed her fence. The old lady was very grateful and gave the helpers a can of milk and a bag of pies. One day at the end of June, Alex, realizing that Margaret would be returning in the dark, went after her. He met her in the middle of the road. "Why are you here?" "It's dark," he said. "I thought you were scared." "Today is the 21st, Margaret said, as if it meant something. "It's the day of the shortest night of the year. It'll be light before you get home, won't it? But I'm scared to be home alone." Margaret laughed. She knew she liked Alex, and she knew he liked her, but she didn't know what the outcome of their affection would be. The blue night sky was covered in a scattering of 1,000,000 stars, and at the very top was a bright, full, warm moon, lighting the path so brightly it felt like it was daytime outside. "When you showed up at my compound and started talking about your sister, I thought you were just like her," Alex started to say suddenly. "A hypocritical bitch and cruel. But then I saw how upset you were about losing your daughter, and I realized that you weren't. You're the woman I always wanted to have by my side," Alex admitted. Margaret stopped breathing for a second, then took a deep breath, hesitating to look at Alex. "I haven't had a wife or even a relationship longer than a couple months. After Vivi, she took away any faith I had in women and people. But you've been able to restore my faith. Your jokes, your concern for the kids, your love for your work. It all made me see that there is good in this world." "Why do you say that?" Margaret asked. "You and I are adults. I think it only takes a couple of days at our realized age to know if someone is your person or not." Margaret finally shifted her gaze to the man. He was looking straight at her. His eyes shone with hope and some feeling she didn't recognize. You are a very good man. Really 100 times better than my ex-husband or any man I've ever had in my life. But I'm in my 40s. I have 3 kids, a lot of problems, and a mean sister. Do you really need that? The man grinned and pulled Margaret to him. I'm not 15 either, Margaret, and I know what I need. A tiny flame of hope flickered in the woman's heart. She smiled timidly. Margaret was walking home from camp late at night. Everything had to be prepared before the inspection. It was almost dark outside, and she was enjoying the cool night air and moonlight. Then she saw someone walking towards her. Margaret smiled. A man was walking towards her with a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. Margaret smiled, embarrassed. Are these for me? It's for the most beautiful woman in this village. Alex tilted his head and said. Margaret laughed. Yes, clever. Very clever. Thank you. Alex smiled back and put up his elbow. Margaret put her hand on it. Shall we go for a walk? Only if it's to the house. I don't have the energy at all. Here's how I can edit the continuation of the text. Can you believe we've cleaned everything we can? Margaret said. I don't think a cleaning lady cleans that much in a year. We also put on everything we can in the compound before the inspection. One time they made us clean with a jump rope. Can you believe that? Margaret laughed. And we took a test before camp that had a question about how to sanitize baby nipples. And camps from the age of 7? How stupid is that? Alex shrugged. The phone rang. Margaret pulled the phone out of her pocket and gasped. It's Kira, the woman whispered, and took a step backward out of weakness. Alex picked her up, afraid she would fall. With a trembling hand, Margaret pressed answer. Hello, Kira. Yes, me. Who are you? Where's my daughter? What? How long? Let me talk to her. Please, Kira. Margaret put the phone down and looked at Alex in confusion. Her eyes were filled with fear, pain, and confusion. She's been kidnapped, Margaret said quietly. They told me to pay $1.5 million in cash. They said they'd send me an address. We have to go to the police. Gathering, Alex said. Margaret shook her head, and the sobs came out again. They said that if I go to the police, they wouldn't spare her. Alex sighed, taking the woman under his arms and leading her home. After packing their things, they went to the city. By morning, they were already at Margaret's house. She opened the door with her key. She was greeted by Vincent and Matthew. The boys were hugging their mother and looked worried. Mom, we can't reach Linky. It's been 2 days for Andrew, too, they said. What are you all so excited about? Shouted a cheerful voice from the kitchen. A woman in a red leather jacket came out into the corridor. The girl wanted to go for a walk. And you're already shouting. She won't have to live her life with that face. Margaret stared at her sister and threw herself at her. She caught hold of her dark hair and pulled. It was you, it was all you. You're the reason she stopped talking to me. You're the reason she was taken away. It's all you. Margaret screamed. The sons and Alex barely pulled Margaret away from Vera. Alex wrapped his arms around the woman, pressed her against him, and began to whisper soothing words in her ear. Margaret began to calm down. You're crazy, Vera shrieked, standing up. Vincent and Matthew looked at each other. Mom, are you saying she's been kidnapped? They asked. She already said that, Alex said a little harshly. We got a call for ransom. What makes you think it's my fault? Vera asked. Because there's no one else, Alex said again. You're the only one here who has gotten involved with dangerous people. Vera tilted her head and looked into the man's face. Alex, what are you doing here? Alex clenched his jaw, remaining silent. "Guys, get her out of here. Otherwise, I can't vouch for myself," he said. Matthew nodded at the door. Faith opened her eyes wide. The boy took her gently under his arm and led her to the door. "Go to your brother's, Vera. You'll be better off there. No one needs you here. We only put up with you because of Linda." Vera adjusted her bag on her shoulder, hummed, her chin high, and walked quickly away. She was out of sight. A few minutes later, Vincent, Matthew, Alex, and Margaret were sitting at the table in the kitchen. Vincent was making tea while the others talked quietly. There was a cell phone in the middle of the table. Suddenly it rang. Margaret grabbed it and pressed the answer button. "Yes, the money. We don't have the whole amount. Give us time," she said. "Okay, we'll find it all. Is Linda alive? Let me talk to her." "Daughter, are you all right?" Margaret fell silent. Dropped, Vincent concluded and put the tea on the table. "Mother, calm down. Did you hear Linda's voice?" Matthew asked. Margaret nodded. She was so frightened. "I can't. Where can we get so much money? Can we sell the cars?" Matthew shrugged his shoulders. "No," Alex said sharply. "I've already called my friends from the army. We'll do everything." The woman jumped up from her seat and grabbed Alex's hands. "No, you're not a robber. She's my daughter, but she's your daughter too," the man objected. "You raised her for years, didn't you?" "Don't you dare," Margaret shouted. "We'll find the money, we'll pay the ransom. Sell the cars," she ordered her sons. The boys nodded. "Is the whole sum here?" Margaret asked, wrapping her trembling hands around the bundle. She was breathing hard and looking around. Matthew nodded. "Mother, make it look easy, please. I'm carrying money to ransom my daughter. Do you really think I can be calm? I can't be calm on principle." The guy shook his head. "Good luck to you." Margaret nodded and walked forward. She had to save her daughter, even if she had to give up all the money to do so. Kira's life was the most important thing. The criminals called and told her to bring the money to the safe deposit box at the airport. Where to pick up Kira, they would tell her later. Margaret walked uncertainly through the airport trying to find the safe deposit boxes. She walked to the right one and slowly opened it, putting the money inside. She slammed the metal door shut and headed away without looking around. The phone vibrated and Margaret jumped in surprise. It was a text message with an address a few blocks from the airport. The woman rushed to the car where her son was waiting for her in Alex's car. "Matthew, let's go. I'll show you the way," she said. The boy started the car and they started. In just a few minutes they were there at the old abandoned factory. Margaret jumped out of the car and rushed inside. Matthew hurried after her. They searched every floor and even the basement, but the girl was nowhere to be found. Margaret screamed until she was hoarse, but there was no answer. The woman turned to her son and began to slowly slide down the cold wall. "Kira is gone. We've lost her, Matthew. We've lost our little girl." "Matthew, what am I going to do?" she moaned. The boy looked around confused. He shouted again and then picked up the mother and walked her to the car. While they were looking for the girl, the sun had set and it had gotten completely dark. Matthew dialed Alex's number. "Uncle Alex, it's empty," he said. "What about you?" Alex asked. "That we're on our way." They found her. Matthew smiled. About 20 minutes later, the car with Matthew and Margaret pulled up to a cottage village. There were several police cars parked near one of the houses. The blinkers were on and there were uniformed men everywhere. Vincent, surrounded by several large men, stood beside one policeman, and said something. In the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, sat Kira. Margaret saw her and rushed over to her. She tripped and fell on the cold grass. Matthew helped his mother up and they ran to the girl. Kira. Margaret grabbed her daughter's face. "Are you all right? My good girl. Who was that?" Kira saw her mother and started to cry, wrapping her arms around her. "Mommy, they were alone in the apartment, and they grabbed me. Who let them in?" Margaret screamed hysterically. She's Vivi. She let them in. She owes them a lot of money. I became the bait to get you to pay and repay her debts." Margaret ahed and staggered back, grabbing her son. After learning that her husband had a mistress, the wife did not make a fuss, but did something different. They'd been estranged for a long time. Not anymore. Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, and they were left alone in a huge house, where each could get lost and not see the other. They didn't talk to each other for days at a time, not because they were fighting, but because they were strangers. But for 22 years of life together, they never became close. On the contrary, with each passing year, they grew farther and farther apart. Of course, they could have broken up a long time ago, but something kept them apart, especially in the mornings. Ajay couldn't see Olivia sleeping. It was a good thing it was dark at night, and he couldn't see her in her sleep with her mouth open, breathing loudly, sometimes even snoring. How ugly is she when she sleeps? Ugly to the point of nausea. But when she woke up first, she was not one iota more beautiful. EJ knew in advance that when he showered, he would go into the kitchen and see her sloppy, in a hastily thrown-on robe, her hair disheveled, bunched up and tied with a rubber band, her cigarette in her hands, and a mug of coffee. Not a cup, but a mug. "Can we not smoke in the kitchen?" Ajay will ask again. Or he won't say anything at all, and won't even look in her direction. "Where should I smoke?" Olivia asks. And he won't answer her question. He just doesn't want a morning argument that will wear out his nerves and ruin his mood. Ajay had a quick breakfast and left for work. He had to be there by 8, Olivia by 9. It used to be that when Bridget lived with them, her daughter or Ajay would make breakfast. The two of them would eat breakfast together, and there would be a semblance of family. Now even that was gone. The dead house had finally died with Bridget gone. At night, Olivia made attempts to get closer to Ajay, at least physically. And there, lo and behold, she'd crawl under her husband's blanket, put her arms around him, kiss his shoulder, and try to grope his flesh. Dona Ajay brushes her hand away. Everything is calm in Baghdad. Olivia laughs angrily. "You impotent wretch. You think I don't know you only get it up for your mistresses? I hate you." "Let's get a divorce," Ajay once again suggests. "No way. No way. You'll thank me that I didn't want to divorce you, divide the house, divide the property. And this is when we have everything. Live and be happy." Somehow there's no joy. There's nothing to be happy about, Olivia. And you need to finally realize that. I've been ready for a divorce for a long time. I don't want to fight. Ajay interrupts. I want things to be peaceful so that Bridget can. Shut up. We're going to have grandchildren any day now. And what? You and me? They'll come separately to the cramped apartments we can afford after we divide the property. I wanted to live a selfish life for myself. You were, and you still are. You know, the time will come when you won't be able to stop me. Divorce is imminent. It hasn't come yet. What's keeping you? Bridget. I am. I want an amicable divorce. Bridget and Virginia, Ajay thought and smiled. If Virginia agreed, he would have divorced Olivia long ago. It was a good thing Olivia hadn't seen him smile, or there would have been a scandal. She hated it when he smiled, thinking he was thinking about his mistress, and she wasn't wrong. Not about a mistress, but about the one and only one he loved, and he didn't need any others. Virginia, hello, my love. I miss you as much as Danielle. Vacation. Freedom. Daniel's doing great. Only 1B in English. He's going to Grandma's after tomorrow. So you're free, and I'm free. Olivia left for her mother's yesterday. Will you come over? Can you make it? Ajay wrote. Well, I don't know, Virginia smiled to herself. You know what would agree? How many years have they been dating? And she always goes to Ajay's place like it's a first date. It's about time they got used to each other for so many years. It's even time to get used to each other. But no, it's not working out for either Virginia or Ajay. Virginia, I miss you. Come to my place, come on, I'll be waiting for you, said Ajay. You don't have to meet me, it will attract attention. I'm tired of hiding and I don't want that. I'll meet you at 6:30 outside your office. And that's it, he insisted. Come on, you're driving me away. If I wait for you, I'll pass you by, Virginia objected. I'm not kidding, Ajay. I'll walk by like I don't know you. Let's keep it simple. I have to go home after work. Don't forget, besides Daniel, I have a cat named Thomas. And he's waiting for me. I'll take a cab myself. Am I doing your bidding again? Ajay laughed. Well, I guess that's the fate of some men, to wait for their sweethearts. Virginia, life is so short, and we're all waiting for something, he sighed. What are you starting, Ajay? Everything has been said and decided long ago. Everything will be as it is, Virginia said. I love you. I love you. And I'll never stop telling you that, Virginia, he said. Usually men say it before, Virginia joked. You say it after. You're not the right kind of lover. I've always said it, and I'll keep saying it until you get tired of it, Ajay smiled. Don't expect I won't, Virginia smiled back. He saw her smile even in the dark and kissed the corner of her lips. I'm glad I'll wake up with you in the morning. You don't realize how beautiful you are when you sleep. I've been looking at you and looking at you and looking at you. They say when you not only want to fall asleep but also wake up with that person, that's true love. Virginia, you're the one I want to wake up with every morning, Ajay said. You're at it again, Ajay, over and over again. Why doesn't Virginia tell Daniel you're his father? You tell him stories about a father who doesn't exist, and yet you're right there with us, and yet you're far away from us. Who needs that? Virginia, I want to be with you all the time, to take care of you every day. All women dream of that, but you don't. I can see you're worried about a difficult situation, Virginia, and you have serious concerns about how you're going to talk about it and what the repercussions will be for those around you. You know why I can't tell you now. And it's for the best, Virginia said. It's still a deception, no matter how you look at it. You think this deception is your way of keeping my marriage to Olivia alive. It's long gone. You of all people know that. Bridget's an adult with her own life. I don't see how we're going to be able to tell everyone, she asked glumly. Do you have any idea how many people we'd hurt, how many people we'd make unhappy? Olivia, her mother, Bridget, my parents, Daniel. There's no telling who else will be in this line because of the two of us. A lot of people's lives will change. And the fact that I'm sleeping with you, my best friend's husband, and she doesn't know. I'm sure she's complaining to you about how impotent I am, that I have tons of mistresses. Doesn't that change someone's life? Listening to her, you must sympathize. And she doesn't suspect a thing, Virginia continued. I wonder what you told her about Daniel's father? I told her it was a resort affair. And everyone's blind, they can't see that he looks like you. Or they don't want to see. I don't know. They do. They don't, but it's more peaceful. Can you imagine the town turning against my parents when they find out I stole my husband from my best friend who I grew up with since I was a kid? Okay, other people. But Olivia's mother is my parents' neighbor. How are they supposed to live with their houses next to each other? Virginia asked AJ. How, AJ, can you answer all my questions for me? And how do I explain to Daniel that Uncle AJ is not only Bridget's dad, but also his dad? What about us, Virginia? AJ sighed. We don't. Soon you won't need sex, and you'll start to forget about me. What's that got to do with it? Virginia wondered. You see, I'm getting older. I don't want to be with Olivia. I want to be with you. I'm going to be a boring old woman. Virginia tried to turn the conversation into a joke. I'll be nagging you, shuffling my feet. Perhaps I will sing ugly, weak because of my weak voice. Then you'll realize what a mistake you've made, said Virginia. Falling for my charms when you were young. What about Olivia? Does she smoke? Does she drink her coffee? That's the way she's always been. That's the way she'll always be. And if you don't touch her, she won't touch anyone. And I want you to touch me and grumble. And I'd hug you and smile, and you'd stop grumbling, she continued. And tomorrow I'll turn you on your side, and you'd stop singing. And that you'll be ugly, I'll never believe that. You'll always be beautiful to me. All right, AJ, let's make a bet. It's almost morning. Let's do it. I love waking up first and watching you sleep. He kissed her on the temple, and she woke up, reached up and hugged him. Is that what you're doing to me? Ajay smiled and hugged Virginia. I gotta go, Virginia said, trying to get out of his embrace. Olivia is on the first bus to arrive. She told me about it. Do you think she guesses and warned me on purpose? I don't know what she knows or doesn't know. We hardly talk to her, AJ replied. We'll get there in time, he said. AJ put his arms around Virginia and drew her to that height, that flight of feeling, where not only their bodies but their souls join. And right then, just in that moment, he felt that he and Virginia were one, inseparable. And now Virginia cried out and gratefully embraced AJ. But the brightness of the orgasm was beginning to fade from the altitude in which they had taken flight. They were returning to everyday life. And now Virginia cried out and her body tensed. But unlike before, her arms didn't wrap around his neck. They slid off his shoulders. Virginia's body shuddered, and her frightened, fixed eyes stared at AJ with a glazed look. And he suddenly realized that she was not breathing. Virginia, Virginia, shouted AJ, and began to shake her, trying to bring her back to life. He started CPR, but nothing worked. EJ called an ambulance and tried to breathe life into Virginia until it arrived. There's an ambulance outside our gate. Do you know who to see? The first thing Olivia asked when she entered the house. EJ stood at the window and, without turning around at his wife's voice, answered. To our place. Who? Us. Olivia wondered. Over there, he nodded toward the bedroom. Virginia's in there. He turned, and Olivia saw that AJ was crying. He wiped the tears from his face with a quick motion and looked at Olivia in silence. She had never seen EJ cry before, and it struck her as much as Virginia and the EMTs in their bedroom. Without a word, Olivia opened the door with a sharp movement and saw her friend's naked body on the floor and the doctors putting some instruments into their cases. Why is she on the floor? Olivia asked, shocked. Apparently it was easier for the man to perform CPR that way, the doctor answered and added, she's dead. The cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner. We've already called there. They'll come for the body soon. She's dead, Olivia said confusedly as she came out of the bedroom. She slumped into a chair and pulled cigarettes out of her purse with a trembling hand. "I know," AJ answered without turning to look at his wife. There was silence. Ajay was grateful that she wasn't interrogating him right now. He heard the coffee machine turn on. Apparently, a cigarette without coffee was unusual for Olivia. Olivia noisily sipped her coffee and flapped her nose. "Crying?" Ajay wondered. Didn't she understand anything? Olivia was indeed crying. Turning to her, he saw her wiping away her tears and blowing her nose loudly into her handkerchief. "What's going to happen now?" Without looking at her husband, she asked. "I have to meet Daniel tonight. He's there, at Virginia's parents." "I have to tell her parents. Can you do that?" "I can do that. I'll let them know." "Thank you." "For what?" "Thank you for not asking me anything. We'll talk about it later." "There's nothing to talk about," Olivia said. Olivia took a deep breath and said, "If I've been silent all this time, it's not because I'm so stupid that I can't see what's going on. I've seen it all, and I see it all. Is Daniel your son? You don't have to answer that. I already know he's your son. But we'll talk about that later, not now." "Thank you, Olivia," Jay said. The car from the morgue arrived. Virginia's naked body was carried past Ajay and Olivia. "It's over," Olivia said. "She's not coming back here." "Why did you say that, Olivia?" "Why?" Ajay asked. "To make you feel better. We're burying Virginia. You look like you've lost it. Her parents are elderly. We'll have to make the funeral arrangements. They'll probably want to bury her in her home village. I hope you realize no one wants all these juicy details for their own peace of mind. No one wants the truth. Not Virginia's mother, not her parents. And neither do Daniel and Bridget. And I thought it was time Daniel knew I was his father," Ajay said. "Not now. The boy is 11 years old, his mother's dead, and now you're the father." "Not now," Olivia objected. "How do we explain that Virginia died in our house? Let's say she didn't know I'd gone to my parents' house and came to see me. She got sick, and while the ambulance was on its way. A doctor again, and a doctor when she's gone. Vika, you understand. I loved her, and I love her," Ajay said in a shaky voice. It hurt Olivia to hear it, but she wasn't going to make a scandal. She'd always been strong, and now, more than ever, she needed to stand firm, not comfort her flailing husband. "Stop being hysterical," Olivia said harshly. "Don't you think I should be the one throwing tantrums, not you? You've always been a rock, impenetrable, indifferent. There's nothing feminine about you. Why should I love you? You're like a tank." Ajay wanted to say something, but he was stopped by a slap from Olivia. He stopped talking and stared at his wife with tears in his eyes. And then he calmed down. "Keys to the apartment," Olivia demanded. "Virginia, do you have keys?" Olivia asked. "Yes, go to the train station to pick up Bridget. Get some things for him at the apartment and come here." "Will you be able to tell the baby?" Ajay asked. "No, I can't." "How? How am I going to tell him?" Olivia replied. "I knew it. I'll have to go with you." "Where's Mom?" Daniel was surprised to see Uncle Ajay with Aunt Olivia. "Come on, Daniel, let's go to the car. I'll explain everything to you," Olivia hugged the child. An unsuspecting Daniel smiled and looked at Uncle EJ. AJ turned away from the boy and cried. "Did something happen?" Daniel realized. "Mommy, where's Mommy?" The child asked with concern in his voice, tormenting EJ's soul. "You what?" Danielle shouted. "Are you what? Where's Mommy?" "Mommy's not here anymore," replied Olivia. "What do you mean, gone?" You're what? Daniel shouted. People at the train station began to pay attention to them. Mom is dead, replied Olivia and hugged Daniel. The boy pushed Olivia away and ran, but she quickly caught up with him and hugged him tightly, not allowing him to break free. She looked at Ajay reproachfully. Not everyone is as tough as you are, Olivia said to him. Why are you standing there like that? They're waiting in the car. I hope I don't have to run with you. About 10 minutes later, Ajay and Olivia returned. The boy was crying his eyes out. Olivia hugged him, pulled him close and stroked his head the whole way. Pulmonary embolism. Cardiac arrest, instant death. That was the cause of Virginia's death. She was buried, as Olivia had expected, in her home village, where she had been born and where her parents had lived. Daniel stayed with his grandparents for the rest of the summer vacation. They had taken custody of him, and from the end of August, at Olivia's insistence, Daniel would have to live in her and Ajay's house. Why would he want to change from a city school to a country school? There are teachers and kids there that Daniel is used to. As a teenager, it's stressful for a child. Olivia argued. It wasn't enough for him to be stressed by his mother's death. Aunt Mary, Uncle Bill. Well, it's not like he's going to live from strangers. Then again, you're elderly people. Can you handle it? Olivia objected. Why, Olivia, why would you need such a burden? We're his relatives, we're his guardians, said Virginia's father. It is impossible for us to move to a one-room apartment in the city in our old age. Here on Earth we have lived all our lives, and here we will die. We need to think about Daniel now, not about whose blood related to whom, Olivia said. He's not a little boy anymore. Let's ask him what he thinks about it. No, I'm just going to my class. What about it? Daniel replied, confused, realizing that was impossible. Uncle AJ and I want you to live with us, Daniel. Then you can go to your own school and be in your own class. Can we do that? Daniel hesitated. You can and you should. But are we strangers to you? Thank you, Aunt Olivia. Daniel smiled and hugged Olivia. Ajay, what do you say? You're all quiet. Would Daniel be a burden to you? Virginia's mom asked. No, we're great friends of Daniel's, Ajay said. I think Olivia's right. He wanted to announce to everyone that Daniel was his son. How could he be against his son? But he realized Olivia was right. Right now, we have to get past Virginia's death. The news of his paternity would be too hard on everyone. After Virginia's funeral, Ajay took a vacation and drank. He hadn't been addicted to alcohol before, but now it had become his cure for losing his beloved. Maybe it's time to stop drinking. After 2 weeks of drinking, Bridget's wife asked, We need to fix up Daniel's room. You can drink endlessly and reach the end of the road, but it's not going to bring Virginia back. Do you need to think about your son right now? Sobbing drunkenly, Ajay, Daddy, you never understood me. All you ever wanted was money and nothing else. Virginia's gone and I don't want to live. If you don't want to live, then don't live. But you have to live for others, Bridget replied. What do you mean, don't live? Ajay stared at her. He poured vodka into his mug and drank it in one gulp. He wrinkled his nose and asked his wife, Are you suggesting that I kill myself? But if you don't want to live, you have to fight it, do something, catch up with your beloved. Bridget, no insults. I understand you're going through an irreparable loss, Virginia's death. But it's wrong to vent your pain by blaming others. You're right. I didn't take responsibility for Daniel for mercenary reasons. I sincerely want him to be surrounded by care and love, to continue to learn in a familiar environment. This is now so important for the boy after the tragedy. I realize that I cannot fully understand your pain of losing the woman you love. Love is the greatest feeling that not everyone gets to experience in life. Virginia was your guiding star, and her passing has broken your heart. But the hatred and hurtful words against me are misplaced. You and I have traveled a long road together. Yes, our marriage wasn't perfect, but our son Daniel grew up in it. This is not the time for recriminations. Let's put aside past resentments and concentrate on the most important thing: our son, who was left without a mother. He needs our support and care. I say we stop fighting and get together to fix up Daniel's room. We'll renovate, create a cozy environment to make him feel at home. We'll discuss all the details. I'll allocate the necessary funds. For Daniel's sake, let's put aside our differences and join forces. It's already hard enough for the boy. Let's not add to his worries. Together we can get through this terrible grief. That's what I suggest. Bridget questioned Olivia's intentions. Why would you do that? I don't understand your diabolical schemes. How can you talk about anything when you're drunk? If you were sober, I could answer your questions. And when you're sober, I'll tell you about my diabolical schemes. I'll explain why I didn't give you a divorce. Why I didn't chase Virginia out of my house like the last creature she was. But then I'm afraid you'll lose heart. Ajay and Virginia were weak people. Two lovebirds met, but love alone is not enough to live. The weak must lean on the strong. To what? So the strong can crush them? I hate this hatred boiling up inside me. Hate is a feeling. Maybe it can sustain you in this drunken frenzy. Olivia turned on the coffee maker and lit a cigarette. She had no problem with Daniel's upbringing. Virginia seemed... Why should I love him? He doesn't love me either. He's got a fool like himself on the side, and they're enjoying each other. Let them enjoy each other. But I won't give him a divorce. I didn't spend so much effort on him to give him away. Why a fool? Maybe she's the other one who's not a fool at all. You don't say. If she's in love with him, she's a fool. How can you live like this without love? I don't understand. It's easier, Olivia said sharply. Olivia retorted. But what do you have to gain from your love? See each other once or twice a week? Texting? Is that what love is for? To have each other once in a while? Then it's not love, it's just a deal. Our life is a bargain, replied Virginia. Your husband asks you while he's got something working for him, and then you're alone as a wife. Are you alone? Why alone? I have a son, Daniel. I have a daughter too, but she has her own adult life. And your Daniel won't be a child forever. There will be grandchildren, Virginia smiled dreamily. And what will you give your grandchildren? One room. I'm not divorcing my asshole so I don't have to share with him. I want to keep everything for Bridget. But you know, if you live by that standard, what kind of life is that? It's just an ordinary life, no worse than anyone else's. How do you think other people live? Floating in the clouds. Clouds are the element of birds. We humans are earthbound, materialistic creatures. You, Virginia, think about what you're saying and leave your man. Quietly find a normal man who doesn't sing your bedtime dithyrambs but earns money. I can't do that. I need love. That was the last conversation I had with Virginia. Where did she push her? To an ignominious death in someone else's bed. Once again, Olivia has to cover up her lowlife. All because she's strong, not a sissy. But Ajay, on the other hand, is distraught over the death of his beloved. And Olivia can't help him pull himself together, be strong. She's strong, and here she is, powerless after work. To sleep. As EJ said himself, he takes 2 or 3 shots of vodka, and on weekends he gets drunk to a semi-conscious state. Stop drinking. Olivia urged her husband. Daniel sees you in a bad way. Let him see what you've done to his father. You brought this on yourself, and don't open your filthy mouth about being a father. Nobody wants that, especially you. I'm lost, Olivia, drunken AJ sobbed. My Virginia's gone. and I'm gone with her. You're going to wait for me to ask the tenants out of the apartment. And I'm going to send you there too. I'm sick of looking at your drunken face and cleaning up after your drinking. Don't clean up. I'll clean up, Olivia. Just don't move me into Virginia's apartment. I'll go crazy in there. You will. You'll end up in a mental institution. Although you'll probably stop drinking there. I'm done. Olivia promised a drunken Ajay. I'm done drinking. You'll see. Promises remain promises, and Olivia continued to watch EJ drink. Bridget's entreaties didn't work on him either. Dad, maybe it's time to get treatment for alcoholism, Bridget asked. Treatment for what? What are you, daughter and mother together? What am I, a drunk to get treatment? Ajay was getting drunk, and no one could resist it. He was tolerated at work for a long time. But after a couple of years, when they began to notice that at work he smelled of alcohol, he called his boss, asked him to write a letter of dismissal. Daniel's son, yelled a drunken AJ. At least you're not giving up on me, unlike Olivia. Uncle Ajay keeps saying I'm his son, Daniel said. I guess he thinks because you live with us, he can think of you as his son. He gets drunk and talks nonsense. The truth is, of course, he's not your father and you're not his son. Ignore what he says, Danielle. Olivia didn't understand what money Ajay was drinking on when he was out of work. Apparently, he had some savings that she didn't know about, and that worried her greatly. Spending that kind of money was incredibly stupid. At the moment, their budget wasn't big enough for him to squander that much money. Sometimes she wished he would die so she could finally breathe free and not worry about anything, and she had plenty to worry about. If Daniel was known to be Ajay's son, then he would be his father's heir too, which meant she'd have to share it with him. That's why Olivia had taken Tammy into her home to, as they say, keep her finger on the pulse. Otherwise, you never know. Maybe Ajay would start traveling to the village to see Daniel's parents from the branch, and he'd let it slip that he was Daniel's father. This way, everything's in plain sight, everything's under control. He calls Daniel's son, and she explains to the boy that it's Uncle Ajay's drunken ramblings. And she's got Ajay under her watch, everything under control. Had Ajay known that Bridget wasn't his daughter, but his old friend Mike. But she liked Mike, and he liked her. Maybe that's called love. Olivia doesn't remember anything about it now, but at the time she knew that nothing good was going to happen between her and Mike. Mike was the leader, and she was his equal. Then Olivia decided to marry the docile, quiet EJ who was graduating from college. She was glowing. You could say she'd gotten him into bed, and then presented him with her one-time pregnancy. Does that happen? Ajay wondered at the time. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled with the news, but he'd never given up on his marriage to Olivia. Not once did he doubt that Bridget was his daughter. Olivia saw that he loved Bridget more than Daniel. It was understandable. He saw her day in and day out, interacted with her, and she loved him. Sometimes it seemed to Olivia, or maybe it didn't even seem like it, that Bridget loved her father more than he loved her. It made her both happy and a little sad. But mostly, of course, it made her happy. It was a good thing Virginia was dead. No one would ever find out. AJ's getting drunker by the day, and no one listens to his drunken ramblings anymore. Well, Virginia's gone, so the secrets will remain secrets. When were Olivia and Virginia real? And there was no AJ standing between them. Olivia stupidly told her that Bridget wasn't Ajay's daughter, which she regretted. And when she found out about her husband's affair with her friend, she feared exposure. But Virginia kept quiet. Strangely enough, she didn't. Or maybe she'd just forgotten. Though it's hardly the sort of thing one forgets. But Olivia's secret was gone with her friend. And that was good for her. No, Daniel's presence was a little inconvenient. But it was such a small thing compared to what she would keep. Besides, Daniel provided for her financially the pension. the income from her mother's apartment. Her parents from the village tried to give her some money. And then, when Daniel turns 18, then let him move into his mother's apartment and live independently. By that time, Olivia hoped EJ would have already gone to heaven to his beloved, especially since he was so eager to go to her, so drunk. It's just impossible. That's all. No one to share it with. Everything will be left to her and Bridget. Aunt Olivia, I need to brush up on my English, get a tutor. Is that possible? Or I'm going to get in. A B's ruining the whole picture. I can't do it on my own. I need extra credit. As far as I know, chemistry and biology are important for college, not foreign language. How high do you think they're going? That's where they get in. Do you need the money? I don't think I'm aiming too high. Medicine is my thing. I'll do it on my own, Aunt Olivia, without the money. So you're turning me down? I don't know, of course. Maybe all the money goes to support me. Olivia was silent, wondering how she could refuse Daniel. Excuse me, I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, feeling awkward. Is it that there is no money for my son? Ajay intervened in the conversation. He seemed to be sleeping on the couch in the living room, where Olivia was watching TV, and under the influence of the green snake, he seemed to be sound asleep. Turns out he could hear everything. Good for you, son, for striving. You're good. There'll be money. I said it'll come. Ajay gave Olivia an angry look. Lately, Ajay had become aggressive. I guess it was the alcohol, and arguing with a tipsy Ajay was useless. What are you looking at me for? Said Ajay. Dad, don't. I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, realizing that he was the cause of an emerging scandal. What grandparents with a living father? And call me father, not dad. Father, that's all you are. Understand, Daniel? Father, Daniel answered, confused. Calm down. We were just talking to Dania, discussing the matter. Didn't you hear me say no? Olivia said. Of course, if you have to, Dania. How many classes a week? I think 2 classes of an hour and a half. All right, go on, Danielle, we need to talk to Daddy. Thank you, Olivia. I really need this class. I told you, Ajay said to Olivia. I'm not a dad. I'm Donnie's dad. Okay, fine. Okay, Dad, Olivia winked at Daniel. As Daniel left to go to his room, EJ continued. Maxime, you demand money for Donnie's classes and you don't work for the man himself. What am I, a printing press? Have you been playing dumb? The money you get for Donnie, you don't spend it all on him. So in the time he's been living with us, I think a decent amount of my money has accumulated. And my labor doesn't count. Did you ask for it? I just don't know why. Maybe you thought you could make a profit off an orphan who was just yelling that he was the father. Olivia whispered. So, Daddy, get your ass up and get to work. Teach your son by example. I'll go and work. Oh, it's fresh in my mind, but I find that hard to believe. How long have you been doing nothing? On indefinite leave. You haven't counted. You're sitting on my neck and opening your mouth. You've got some nerve. I'm not sitting on your neck either. What are you drinking to? You don't know I don't take money from you. And your relatives give you money. It's a one-time job. It's time you got a regular job, Olivia said. When I have to, I will, Ajay replied. Olivia realized that the conversation wasn't going well. But it was a good thing that AJ hadn't completely drank his brains away and was still working. He drank on sprees, and between sprees he made money. He realized that his love of alcohol would not be tolerated at a regular job, so he worked at home doing term papers for students. And when there were no term papers, he earned money by technical translations. If it weren't for his nerves and alcohol, he could have tutored Daniel in English himself. But no, he couldn't. You have to be able to convey all the linguistic nuances, and that's the prerogative of a teacher, not a technical specialist. When AJ wasn't drinking, he was unbearable. His sullen look, his nagging, especially when Olivia smoked and drank coffee. Whenever he saw Olivia smoking and drinking coffee, he'd start yelling. Sometimes it got to the point where it looked like he was going to hit her. At those moments, Olivia wanted to strangle him, and she probably would have if she'd known she'd get away with it. Aunt Olivia, I'm sorry about the other day. I didn't think Daddy would react so violently. I thought he was asleep and couldn't hear. I wish I'd known. It's okay, I'm used to it, Olivia said lightly so Daniel wouldn't feel guilty. Daddy insists that you call him Daddy. It's the right thing to do. I don't know whether to argue with him or not. Danielle, you know how it ends. Well, if he wants to call me Dad, then call him Dad. What can I do about his drunken ramblings? Maybe you just don't like calling him that. That's a different matter. Then again, he's not going to let you off the hook with his obsession. On the contrary. You know, I didn't know my father. And I'm glad my dad wants me to call him Dad. So I'll call him Dad. That made things easier for everyone. From then on, Daniel called AJ Dad. And oddly enough to Olivia too. But AJ tried to live up to that title. He even drank less. And when he didn't drink, he made breakfast for Daniel, as he had for Bridget, and they ate breakfast together. AJ seemed motivated to live. And the whole picture was not to Olivia's liking. She was looking forward to the end. And it turned out to be back to the beginning, and maybe soon, very soon, Daniel would find out that he was really E.J.'s son. For now, you can write it off to EJ's drunken ramblings, but how it will turn out from here on out is unknown. But apparently it was enough for AJ that Daniel called him father. For now. And then Daniel went to the academy, which didn't make Olivia very happy. She wished he'd just go back to his apartment. For so many years she'd had to endure the presence of a child, a mistress, a husband. Not everyone would agree to that. She agreed and even called herself auntie, which she regretted more than once. If Daniel hadn't been in their house, maybe by now EJ would have died of drunkenness. But on the contrary, it was as if EJ was rising from the ashes. No, he hadn't stopped drinking, of course, but it was clear that he was struggling with his illness, albeit weakly. Unwilling, weak-willed EJ fought incredibly. And his binges became less frequent and shorter in duration. He even got better and fresher. He was far from dead, Olivia thought, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't poison him like she'd poisoned her husband. Danny, happy birthday, son. You're an adult now, and you're entering adulthood. AJ wept. Don't forget, no matter what happens, we are always with you and will always help you. At the festive table gathered the closest people: Virginia's mother and father, Olivia's mother Bridget, and her husband. For so many years, everyone had gotten used to AJ calling Daniel his son and Daniel AJ his father. Only Olivia won't get used to it. And it's a good thing AJ hasn't completely brain drunk and claimed his true paternity. After all, he does consider the fact that Virginia's parents are still alive and understands that Virginia wouldn't want everyone to know the truth. Honors her memory, Olivia thought. I don't know what I would do without you, Aunt Olivia, without you, Father, without all of you. Thank you for everything. But I can live on my own now. I've made up my mind. I can, Daniel said, seeing his grandmother's frightened look. I can do it. Don't worry about me so much, he smiled at his grandparents. Daniel's right, Olivia said. He's such a self-reliant young man. He came to us, and he knew how to do everything. Thanks to my mom. She taught me everything. Let's drink to Mom, in her memory. Daniel suggested it. She would be happy for me right now and proud of me. A happy memory to Virginia, everyone whispered, except Olivia. They sipped from their glasses and blotted their tears. And I, Danielle, don't agree with you moving a J interrupted the silence. What's stopping you from staying here? Have you been unhappy all these years? I'm fine, everyone, thank you. But as they say, it's time to get used to being on your own. You'll forget us in no time. Saddened, a tipsy Ajay. Who am I supposed to make breakfast for? Who am I going to have breakfast with? Olivia, Daniel answered. Ajay looked at Olivia and sighed. Danielle, let me stay with you for a week, clean up, and then I'll take in the tenants, Grandma suggested. I'm going to make repairs in the summer, on vacation, and now just to clean up. Stay, Grandma. Under your careful guidance, I'll put things in order. Are you okay, Grandpa? Permission? Grandma asked. I'll allow it. But only for a week. I need it myself. Grandma smiled, Virginia's father, and everyone laughed. When Daniel came home from class, he found his grandmother with the secretary open and a pile of papers and receipts taken out of it. What's this? Daniel asked. What is it, Daniel? Cried Grandma, raising her eyes to her grandson. Yes, Anushka, these are your old letters. Grandma. So it turns out that AJ is your real father? Daniel asked in a trembling voice. Grandma held out a thick notebook to him with a trembling hand. On the pages were entries made by his mother's hand. This is Mom's diary, Grandma said. Flip through the pages, just as it was written. It appears so, Grandma replied. It's so personal, but you have a right to know the truth, Danielle. You're a big boy. Maybe it's time for everyone to know the truth. Maybe it's not. Grandma said with doubt in her voice. What will happen to everyone when they find out? I can't imagine what will happen to Grandpa. I'm scared. What about Olivia? She raised you for so many years without knowing the truth. What do you think, Danielle? What do we do? I don't know, Grandma. I have no idea, Daniel answered. I'll read the whole diary, and then you and I will decide what to do. You look so pale. How sick are you? Do you need any medicine? I'll take a drink and calm down, and I'll call my grandfather. How he is there, I'll find out, said the grandmother, confused. So it turns out how it was. After reading his mother's diary, Daniel thought, it's not that simple. For obvious reasons, Mom didn't want this to be known. So now what? Should this secret be kept further from my grandmother and me or not? I wonder if my dad knows that my sister didn't know about it before either, judging from my mom's notes. But it's not my secret, and I don't think I should make it public. Who's going to feel better about it? Bridget, Dad, Aunt Olivia, Grandpa. I mean, after Mom died, Aunt Olivia became his second mother. It was her choice. So she didn't know that Dad and Mom loved each other and that I was really her husband's son. Because what normal woman would take in the son of her husband's mistress? So if she and Grandma reveal this truth, a lot of good people will suffer. No, we shouldn't do that. Let it go as it is. Life will sort things out. But how he wanted to tell his father the truth, that he knew about their love with his mother, how he wanted his father to know that he, Daniel, knew the truth. Couldn't it be okay to tell his father? Daniel thought. From the lines of the diary, it is clear that my father recognized me as his son. Many questions did not find an answer in Daniel's mind, and he didn't know what the right thing to do was. Between the pages of the diary, he found a photo of his mother and father together. So young and happy they were in the picture. Dad, how much I look like him. I'm just now seeing it, Daniel thought. At first glance, you'd think it was me hugging my mom. Daniel found a suitable photo frame, inserted the picture into it, and set it on his desk. He smiled at the picture of his parents and his thoughts. His mom is gone, but he has his dad, and no one can take that away from him. Grandma, how is Grandpa without you? Didn't you tell him anything? Daniel asked. He only misses me. We were never apart. And now, No, I didn't. What if I had a heart attack and he's alone there? Grandma, go to him. There's no reason for you to stay here. You looked at me and realized that I'm quite independent. I'll manage. I understand. But my soul still hurts, sighed Grandma. Grandma, stop it. Here, sit here. Daniel sat his grandmother down at the dining table, made tea, poured it into cups, cut a loaf, took out butter, cheese, and sausage from the refrigerator. How am I doing? Smiling, he asked his grandmother. Are you coping? I'm aching for something else. What's going to happen now, Daniel? I'm talking about what you and I found out. In short, Dad, you come to my place, Daniel suggested. I just moved into Mom's apartment. You've never been to my place. Come on over, because I don't really feel like I'm at your place. I don't really feel, Dad, I feel a little overweight. What do you think? Call me, or I might not be home without a call, Daniel said to his father. You really haven't been to my place. I'll come and see you. Nothing's changed since Virginia's gone. EJ walked around the apartment as if she'd gone out for a minute and was coming back from her memories. Tears came to Ajay's eyes. To keep Daniel from seeing them, he turned to the table and pretended to look at something there. Is this the table where you study? He wasn't exactly here, Ajay said. His heart jumped and froze. Then it pounded so loudly that even Daniel seemed to hear it. Ajay gently took the photo from the table, brought it almost close to his face, shielding the tears from his son with it, and swallowing the lump in his throat, asked, Did you know, Daniel? And how did you forget to hide the photo? Daniel was confused at first, but then thought, that's even better. At least he and his father won't have any misunderstandings. I found out when I moved here. My grandmother was cleaning and found my mom's diary. I got it from the diary. And I didn't tell you. I didn't know whether to speak or not. I mean, the truth could hurt a lot of people. You're right, son. The truth hurts a lot of people, but lies hurt even more, Ajay replied. I'm glad you know. Virginia wanted to keep it a secret for the sake of everyone's peace of mind, but as it turns out, Dad, let's go to the kitchen. I bought a cake. Would you like some tea? I have a terrible sweet tooth like Virginia. She had a sweet tooth too. Come on, we'll have tea. But there's a lot of things we need to talk about. You're an adult. You should know everything. Isn't there anything stronger than tea? Ajay asked. No, Dad, I don't drink. Please don't drink it either, Daniel asked. Ajay suddenly jumped up from his chair and hugged his son tightly. My son, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Dad, come on, Dad. Forgive me for what? I have nothing to forgive you for, Daniel answered, hugging his father. Yes, there is, said Ajay. Well, let's go and drink tea. You're kind like your mother. And I was not known for anger. How do you like it, son? Stronger? You know I like it strong. I'm sorry I asked for alcohol, Daniel apologized. Sometimes I want to get drunk, go to sleep, and never wake up in pain again. I'm hot tea, Ajay replied. I can't live without your mom. You're the only thing keeping me afloat. But if you loved each other so much, why didn't you live together? I would have left Olivia. I never loved her. Yeah, your mom didn't want that, Ajay sighed. She thought it would hurt a lot of people. She was worried about her parents. How would they take it? Especially since they're neighbors with Olivia's mother. And you realize that now. But Grandma knows now. She found the diary and read it. But we agreed not to tell anyone. We thought the truth would make a lot of people unhappy. Especially Aunt Olivia. That's what Virginia thought, too. Ajay grinned. Olivia? Yeah, she knew all about us, knew and kept quiet. It was to her advantage, he said bitterly. Why? Daniel wondered. How can you stand it? You can't. What about me? How did she put up with me around her for so many years? I have some ideas about that. Olivia's used to being in control, which is why I think you're here. And then she realized that she could hold me back with you. She knew I wouldn't blab to Virginia's memory. You think I don't know that when I asked you to call me father, she chalked it up to my battered brain. In short, Olivia is unpredictable. Well, now your mom's journal has interfered with Olivia's plans besides me. And now you and your grandmother know about it. Who besides Olivia, at this point, is going to be made unhappy by this knowledge? Danielle asked. And Olivia's own mother? She has nothing to do with it. I feel sorry for her, Ajay replied. And Bridget? I guess you know the saying, better the bitter truth than the sweet lie. Don't follow in my footsteps, son, or I'll be in favor of. Lying is not what life is all about. And life doesn't stand still, and mine is about to end. And it turns out that I haven't really lived yet. I've lied, I've dodged and dodged. I'm living with someone I don't love. And it's for the benefit of someone, but not for myself, said EJ with a sigh. Do you think everyone should know the truth? Daniel asked. I do. Yes, everyone, AJ nodded. Can you give me Virginia's diary? At least I want to talk to her so badly. I can, of course, but you'll have to give it back. I'm afraid Aunt Olivia will see it and destroy it, Daniel replied, handing it to his father. I did, son, but promise me that when I divorce Olivia, you'll give it back to me for good, AJ asked. What are you doing? Yeah, I was going to divorce her, but she thinks it's my drunken ramblings. This time I'm going to file for divorce and property division. It's about time you took my last name and legalized my paternity. Let's formalize paternity first, change your last name, and then I'll file for divorce, he suggested. I'd be happy to have your last name, father. But there's more secrets. It's the right thing to do, Danielle. Because Olivia is an unpredictable person. She can do all sorts of things, Ajay chuckled. She's a Medea. Oh, really, Dad? Really, Olivia? No, why would you do that? Daniel got worried. Oh, son, you don't know women. They're the cause of all our troubles. And they make us weak. That's right. I'm kidding, Ajay laughed. But it's time for me to go. The cake is delicious, by the way. I'll bring cake next time I come over. Give me Mom's diary. Just wrap it up in a bag, put it in a bag, because I don't have a bag. Well, his father left, and Daniel felt light and happy. Soon he would have his father's last name. He looked at the picture of his parents and saw several bills of money next to it. His father planted it, Daniel said aloud, and smiled. Not believing his eyes, he read the note several times. Vika said Bridget is not Ajay's daughter. I thought she was joking. Even told her it wasn't April 1st and her kind of joke wouldn't fly. It's not a joke, she said. Really, that Virginia still wonders how he didn't get it. Bridget is a copy of her father, Mishka. She is a copy of her father's character. It's a little tough for a girl, but you need that nowadays. It's a time of tough people and grip and tact. My dear friend, do you think all men know who they're raising their own or other men's children? This woman knows who the child is from, and a man can either believe it or not. No, Olivia's not kidding. I don't know why she told me that. Maybe she couldn't bear to keep it to herself. No, of course not. I'm not going to tell Ajay. I don't want to hurt him. Besides, he loves Bridget. Not the kind of father who doesn't even know about his daughter. The kind of father who raised her. Ajay tensed up, his head thudding and pain echoing in his chest area. Bridget, not his daughter. No, he'd never compared her to anyone she looked or didn't look like. He was just sure she was his daughter. Anger swept over AJ. Olivia had bound him to her. He'd put up with her all his life for Bridget's sake, loved someone else, and tolerated Olivia, even when she annoyed him to the point where he wanted to strangle her. He had. Bridget was always a light in the window for him. He was distracted by his daughter and forgave Olivia her dislike for him. And she, knowing he loved Virginia, forgave his dislike for her. That was how they lived in dislike. Before he went down to the kitchen where Olivia was, he breathed deeply, letting out the anger and all the demons that were pushing him to deal with Olivia. And when he had more or less calmed down, he left the room. "You ready to go?" AJ asked sharply. 5 more minutes, and everything will be ready," Olivia answered. "Are you hungry?" Olivia looked at him, smiled, and turned away to slice bread. AJ seemed strange to her, confused and tense at the same time. Probably work problems again, she thought, and sighed. "Bridget's not my daughter," AJ said, sitting down at the table and keeping his eyes on Olivia. Olivia shuddered and tensed. Someone else might not have noticed it, but he'd learned every gesture she'd made over the years. He'd caught her off guard with his question. She didn't know whether to lie or tell the truth. "Why aren't you saying anything, Olivia?" "I asked you a question," AJ asked calmly. He calmed the storm that was brewing inside him as he read over and over the paragraph in the diary that said he wasn't the father of his daughter. Olivia tossed the knife she'd been cutting bread with and turned sharply toward AJ. No, he couldn't read the fear in her face. It was more like triumph. She raised her head proudly and looked up at him, smiling. "Well, yes, Bridget is not yours. So now what? I'm wondering how you know that. Virginia knew and no one else knew. And you kept quiet all this time, and now you want to find out." Olivia wondered. "What's the point of all this fighting now?" "No, I didn't. I just found out. You lied, and it ruined your life." "Oh, come on, don't be so hard on yourself," Olivia snorted. Virginia had told it in her diary and revealed the secret. "So now you're going to give up on Bridget?" "No, I'm not. I raised Bridget, so she's my daughter and my grandchildren. But when I think that I could have had a different life, a happy life with the woman I love, and because of your lies I missed her, I squeezed her out. But with the woman I love, I would have lived. Don't forget that you met your beloved thanks to me." Olivia smiled. "You'd never see your beloved again." "Where would you have met her?" "In a village you didn't even know the name of." "I'm a fool. What is this?" The snake was pulled out of the wilderness by a friend, the mother of her friends, Virginia. I felt sorry for her, and she returned the favor by being ungrateful. "I don't want Bridget to know that I'm not her family," Olivia realized. "That's all I want from you for now, and I won't. I know she loves you. Sometimes I think she loves you more than she loves me. And her kids adore you. What kind of evil am I, ruining all this?" "So Thomas didn't want to marry you. Are you trying to trick me? He didn't even know Bridget was his daughter. I knew even then that Thomas wouldn't make a husband or a father. He's a fickle man, not a husband. That's why I didn't tell him anything and decided to make you both husband and father." "Oh, Olivia, you're so full of it. What's the point of rehashing old times, AJ? We've lived our lives. And you were no angel, upsetting me with your friends and your antics. I raised your kid, you raised mine, and I've seen enough of your drinking. The debts are mine. What's the point of all this litigation now? As they say, you don't change horses at the crossroads. And you and I are already at an advanced age. Or is there something on your mind?" Olivia turned on the coffee machine and lit a cigarette. "Were we going already? Why is that smoke stinking up the place?" AJ asked unhappily. Olivia put out her cigarette, turned off the machine, and began to set the table. "Olivia, I don't get it. For 8 years, Daniel had lived with us, and you treated him like a son? I respected you for it. What's different now? It's like you don't want him to come to us. When he lived here, I was more relaxed. Now it seems like he's coming for you, to take you away," Ajay laughed. "Where? Nowhere. Where?" "Take you away from me, from our house. We didn't love each other and we don't love each other, but still." "And tell me, do you believe that those who loved in their youth, after living such a long life as you and me, continue to love each other?" "I don't know. I haven't lived with my beloved," answered Ajay. "And I know a few who have kept love, and the rest are like us, living out of habit. Again, children and grandchildren bind them. And you know what to expect from the one you live with? You're probably right. I think I'm probably right." "What do you got there? Can't get enough of the good stuff?" "Lamb stew?" Olivia replied. "You're a good cook, that's for sure." Ajay moved his plate over to her. "They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That's not true. I didn't reach your heart with my sincerity." "Well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I will." Flirtatiously looked at her husband, Olivia. "I took the joke," smiled Ajay. "And I'm not joking. I do not want to spend my old age alone, even though we live without love, but habit is a serious matter. I know that you are up there, upstairs, strictly teaching your translations that I should prepare food. Our grandchildren come and enjoy us, and we enjoy them. If all this is ruined, how can we live again? It's too late, AJ, it's too late. And you're going to be alone. The kids have their own lives. It'll just be the two of us. Or do you think you'll meet another one like Virginia? You won't. There'll always be new people to compare her to. And she'll make the others pale in comparison. It's a long shot, Ajay. It's not the right age. Think about what I told you. Think hard. Have you noticed that we haven't really talked to each other in the last few years? Ajay asked. And today, what I found out today set us off on a revelation. We talked, and it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ajay smiled. Bridget's pushing us toward each other again. Or is it just some kind of obsession? You women know how to work your magic, don't you? An hour ago, I was ready to kill you. And yesterday, I wanted to divorce you, Ajay smiled. I guess the stew does have that effect on me. And now what? What now? Olivia looked at him anxiously, her hand reaching for her cigarette. Now, I don't know. I don't know anything, Ajay replied. I know Olivia turned on the coffee machine. You don't have to break what you already have. If you promise that you won't divorce me, won't walk away from me at the sight of bread, tea, and coffee, then I'll accept you like family. And please, Ajay, stop drinking. Stop drinking. You can stop drinking. I know you're strong. Is he strong? She really thinks so? Ajay was surprised at his wife's words. She always thought he was weak. Now all of a sudden. Or is this another one of Olivia's tricks? And you stop drinking liters of coffee and smoking, said Ajay. Can I not smoke? Yes, you can. When I'm nervous, that's when I reach for a cigarette. You can drink coffee, but if you drink a little, you can't drink too much in your heart, said Ajay, smiling. Daniel knows I'm his father. He got it from Virginia's diary, Ajay said. Olivia shuddered. I'm going to give him my last name. I wanted to keep it a secret from you. But you blabbed, Ajay continued. Then everyone will know. Almost everyone knows. Then he'll claim our house. That's right. Bridget is the heiress, and Bridget is our daughter, and Daniel is our son. I don't want to lose the house. Olivia's lips quivered and she cried. I've put so much effort into it. I want to live in it until the end, until my end. I feel it as mine. And the house feels it. I've grown into it. So who's chasing you out of it? You want to divorce me? Which means if anything happens to you, Danielle's going to want a piece of it. My house would be torn apart. Olivia wouldn't stop crying, which means I'd be torn apart. She finished one cigarette, but she should have smoked another. Her hands were shaking, her voice was breaking, and he looked at her, her shoulders were shaking. But on her tired and already not young face, and he felt incredibly sorry for her. He caught himself that in all his life he had never once pitied her. And she had never cried. Never. And now Olivia and he, Ajay, were getting weaker. Ajay realized she needed him. And he needs her. Need her, strangely enough. And not just because he suddenly felt love. Pity is stronger than love. He just realized that now. He went to her, took the cigarette from her hands, put it out and hugged her. The one he had been ready to kill an hour earlier. Don't cry, Kieran, don't cry. Everything will be all right. No one will ever kick you out of this house. We'll just make a will for each other, and if either of us dies. Anyway, is that any way you believe me? Not stopping crying, Olivia nodded affirmatively and hugged Ajay. Will you forgive me? She asked Ajay. There's nothing to forgive, Bridget. My daughter EJ replied. Olivia just said he was strong. She was wrong. He's weak in front of women, in front of their tears, weak. Women have a way of making men weak. How do they do it? Ajay thought, holding Olivia in his arms.